Anybody has public comments this evening, please fill out one of these comment cards and give it to me, and I'll give it to the chair. There's blank ones in the back. Thanks.
I need to go deposit my wet coat.
Hi, how are you?
Okay.
Just for you.
When that guy from Apple came out on the stage, he wasn't Jobs, it was his successor. And he showed that thing, that smartphone, and those people have gasped. They knew that they were not going to connect the world. I didn't get it.
It's pretty crazy.
But you're connected to the world right there.
Did you watch that movie about Steve Jobs?
The movie?
Was it really? Yeah.
No, he's kind of a
didn't
hard
see it,
case.
actually.
Oh, yeah, it was really interesting.
That's a heck of a way to live.
It was really interesting, yeah. I mean, yeah.
But you know, Paul, the guy from Nike, Phil
Knight.
Phil Knight, he had a son that eventually, or his son had a son that made Knight a grandfather. He eventually brought into the fold.
Oh, is that right? Yeah. Well, okay, so we're not all present
Your
yet.
chair.
It's supposed to be here.
Yeah. We will not wait long.
Okay. It's after 7. We should. Right.
The other duties as assigned. This is for later.
See, my chair's wet.
No.
My phone is off.
Oh, this is for the.
My watch is on.
Okay, that's for the. Yeah. Good.
Everybody remembers. Good. Doing all right. You? No, I'm not. Oh, yeah. I don't get to throw the gavel at anyone, which is what I really like to do. Oh, yeah, then I don't have the gavel. Did you get my voicemail? No. I sent you a voicemail to your cell phone. You did? Yes, this evening.
Well, I've been busy with.
No, I just did it about 15 minutes.
My mic worked.
Are you going to entertain everybody while I get out my official script?
We all have official scripts now.
Oh, are you going to read it too?
We could all read it for you. We're going to read parts and do the interpretive dance.
I think the dance is out because we didn't get to practice.
It's interpretive, so.
That's right. All right. Everybody's anticipating. All right, we're going to call to order the Planning Commission meeting. Again, I apologize. I was double booked with meetings tonight, and I did need to go home and eat something because I would have been very grouchy. So I did eat. Anyway, do we have any citizens here tonight who are interested in talking to us about an item that is not on the agenda? We would be happy to talk with you and entertain your ideas or comments. Nobody? Darn, we are very disappointed.
That's the royal weir, right?
The royal we? Yes, it is the royal we. All right. Well, I guess we are ready to move into agenda item number 1.
3.
Yay.
Well, 3A, yes. Agenda item number 1 for me. Did you have anything you wanted to say before I get into the wherewithal and read the statement and everything?
No, if anybody has comments, public comments to make, if you haven't filled out a public comment card, please do and give it to me, and we'll give it to the chair. Thank you.
Laura, I don't have my agenda in front of me.
Okay, for you.
I know it's in this pile of papers that I have, but,
We got one.
oh
left.
no, there it is. Sorry,
Okay.
I did have it. Okay. So we have a public hearing tonight on an item, and for the purposes of the public, we have a quasi-judicial land use script that we are required to read prior to the meeting, so please bear with us. Those of you that know it by heart, just mouth along with us, and will make us feel better that you actually know what we're talking about. So tonight on the agenda, we have AN 16-0004 and ZC 16-0001, annexation and zone change of 35.65 acres north of Holcomb Boulevard. So we have a hearing tonight on this application. A staff report has been prepared for the application and has been made available at least 7 days prior to this hearing and the previous, and not the previous one, however. The staff report identifies approval criteria that apply to each of the applicant's proposals, the proposal. Staff has analyzed that criteria, which is contained in the staff report. One thing you can do for us is please help us when you come to testify by identifying the criteria that's applicable, and it helps us in our decision making. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code, and as many of you are already aware, that is on the chart to my right, above, right next to Laura, and Laura will do her Vanna and point to it. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's slip and give it to the planning staff, to Pete, which he just announced. Speakers will proceed in order of their cards being received, or if I decide to shuffle them around, maybe it won't be, because sometimes they get unshuffled. So we will, for the public record, we please begin all testimony by stating your name, and a testimony and evidence should be directed towards the applicable approval criteria. If you do believe that other criteria is applicable to those addressed, in addition to those addressed in the staff report, please help us by identifying and discussing those criteria and explain why you believe that they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on this application, and any written material received by the planning staff during the time period which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the staff in order to be part of the record. If you intend to use a PowerPoint presentation, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other items for exhibits to be used in your public testimony, copies should be submitted to the staff while the record is still open. Unfortunately, if they are not given to the staff, they will not be included as part of the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence or testimony, or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence, must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for consideration of the City Commission or the Land Use Board of Appeals, or both. Unfortunately, without raising this issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the City and all parties can respond to, the issue will be deemed not appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to that issue precludes an action for damages in civil court. So now we will open the file, the record for this particular application, which I've already said the numbers, and go to my fellow commissioners. Does any commissioner have any ex parte contact, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare? And please indicate whether or not you visited the site. And we'll start with Bob.
No, I have no ex parte contact, and I'm familiar with the site.
Nothing to declare, and I am familiar with the site.
I'm familiar with the site. My wife works for Holcomb Elementary.
Damon?
I visited the site and actually talked to a couple of distant neighbors. And it says here I'm supposed to declare what he or she perceived. And I saw open streams on the site, freshly cut timber on the site, and lots of standing water. Even every place it got level, there was a puddle. So other than that, I have nothing else to declare.
Sure, maybe. Also, if you spoke to some neighbors, the substance of what you heard from them.
It was one person in particular walking on the street. I asked them if they'd heard of the annexation. They were aware of it. I asked if they had any issues with it. Said no. Asked because I'd already visited the site. I asked if they had any issues with water because they were from further up the hill from the site, and they stated that whenever there's heavy rain, they have a spring that runs through their property. That in the dry it isn't there, but it is during the rain, which appeared to be consistent with what I was observing on the site. So they were at least a block north of the site on one of the side roads.
And Tom?
Okay, so I've been on this board or this commission for about 4.5 years approximately, and this will be the first time that I'm going to recuse myself. I happen to live off on Holcomb, and I drive up and down that street several times a day, and I totally understand all the testimony the last time we got together about traffic on there, and so I know most of you. I live in Park Place, and I also know the Sears, so I think it's best that I step aside for this discussion and join the rest of you out there.
Okay. Well, I have also visited the site at the prior to the previous hearing that we had, and I will have to say that I observed the same things you observed when I went by there this weekend. I did also observe the tree removal, and as many of you know, that is not something the Planning Commission really appreciates. I did not see anyone while I was there, and nor did I talk to anyone, so I don't really have any ex parte to declare, but I am familiar with it. I did receive an email from a constituent, basically does not live in the Park Place neighborhood, and indicating that they were not supportive of this particular application. And I'm going to find it in my papers, and I'll tell you what the name is, but I don't have it right off the top of my head. All right. Pete, are you, I guess, so does anybody in the audience want to challenge any of the planning commissioners on what we have said?
Before we get to step forward, I do want to note one thing that wasn't in the material that you read that I think is somewhat important, that this is the evidentiary hearing. If, in fact, it goes to the City Commission, there won't be an opportunity to submit additional evidence or argument. And so, just make sure that people in the audience are aware of that. This is the shot if they want to get that in there. Otherwise, it'll be limited to what was argued below.
Well, someone can still ask for a continuance.
Yes.
All right, Pete, are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll be presenting a PowerPoint presentation, and I'll be entering some items into the record this evening. I'll just begin with the overview. As the city attorney mentioned, this is a Type 4 proceeding. All new evidence will be submitted before the Planning Commission closes the public record. The City Commission review will be on the record. And tonight, or when the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, they're going to be making a determination as to whether this annexation fits with the criteria in Section 1404060 of the Oregon City Municipal Code, which are called the annexation factors. We've had several continuations, as a lot of you are aware. The application was the initial public hearing was November 14th. The application was revised to include a zone change, and we provided additional public notice for that. The Planning Commission hearings are listed here that were continued: November 14th, January 9th, February 13th, and the City Commission, December 7th, February 1st, and March 1st. And at each one, if there was public testimony, it has become part of the record. The March 1st City Commission hearing on this item will be asking for a continuance to March 15th, 2017. And the City Commission may decide not to take testimony if they do not have a Planning Commission recommendation at that point yet. So they'll be basing their decision to take testimony partly on whether they have a Planning Commission recommendation. This is an aerial photograph from 2015 of the site. This photograph indicates the subject property surrounded in blue, and it also indicates the city's urban growth boundary and city boundary. And I'll indicate where the urban growth boundary is. The urban growth boundary follows the north edge of the property and then comes around like this. The city boundary comes around, jogs south around Holcomb Elementary School, down to Holcomb Elementary, and up the side of the county subdivision here. And the process of annexation is bringing the property that is within the urban growth boundary into the city limit. Annexations are not considered development under the city code. Development consists of land division or actual construction. Annexation is all about whether the city can provide services to a property to serve potential development. And that's what the annexation criteria are that we'll be discussing this evening. With respect to adjacent zoning on the property, the site is currently zoned County Future Urban 10. That's a 10-acre minimum zoning district. Surrounded in the northern side by county zoning properties, you have FU10 and also what's called Rural Farm Forest 5-acre. The county subdivision directly to the east abutting this site is FU10. And then across Holcomb Boulevard, you have city zoning, R10, R6, and Holcomb Elementary. And those numbers refer to the minimum lot size when you get city zoning. So R10 means 10,000 square foot lot minimum, and that is the largest lot size in the city limit. So the site is 35.65 acres. It consists of 6 tax lots, currently vacant. It is part of the 1979 urban growth boundary. It's not within the Park Place concept plan area, which is the area south of Holcomb Boulevard, which was concept planned pursuant to metro requirements. Since this property was part of the original urban growth boundary, the concept plan or Title 11 planning requirement does not apply to this property, but the comprehensive plan and all the relevant public facilities plans that the city adopts does. Has a comprehensive plan designation of low density residential, and that has a corresponding city zone of R10. No development is proposed at this time. As we mentioned, the applicant initially applied for annexation and then revised the annexation application to include a rezoning request. To support the request for rezoning, the applicant has prepared what's called a traffic impact analysis, which is details how the application might affect off-site interchanges. In particular, we'll go into more detail on that TIA later this evening. That analysis also includes a finding for compliance with the statewide transportation planning rule. And we have a letter from ODOT that we submitted into the record this evening regarding the transportation planning rule and ODOT interchanges. The annexation factors that are outlined in the city code, and this is chapter 14.04, these factors are subsection 060, are listed here. There are 7 of them. They are discretionary factors, which means that one or some or all of them could apply to the property. When we prepare findings, we make findings of compliance and recommended findings for all 7 of these. They have to do with adequacy of access to the site, conformity with the city's comprehensive plan, which is our long-range land use planning document, whether public facilities and services are available to serve potential development on the site, whether the factors of Chapter 222 and Metro Code for annexation, so these are Oregon Revised Statutes and Metro Code are met, whether there are natural hazards on the site, such as wetlands, floodplains, or steep slopes, and what, if any, impacts might happen with development to these sites. And finally, whether there is any there must be shown a lack of significant adverse effects on the economic, social, and physical environment of the community by the overall impact of annexation. So these are very general criteria. It's not the same kind of criteria that you would apply to a subdivision or a known development application. So we'll go through these in a little bit. With respect to what the comprehensive plan has with regard to natural or hazardous or historic resources on the site, right now it's vacant. There are large trees that were on the property, and we know that there's been some timber felling, and I know we're going to discuss about that. The NROD, or Natural Resource Overlay District, would be applied to this property once it was brought into the city. That is an overlay district that protects wetlands and streams that are in the city's inventories. There's a small wetland on the northern portion of the site, or the buffer of that wetland, just on the other side of the property.
Can you put your
Sure.
cursor there? I know I can't see it on
Sorry.
there, but
Yeah, it's kind
I
of
can look
faint.
up here. Okay.
So there's a wetland here, just on the other side of the property over here. But wetlands under our code have a buffer area of 50 feet and would have to be inventoried when a development application is applied for to see what the condition of the wetland is and what impact that a future subdivision might have on that resource. Over here we have some slope areas that are greater than 25%. That's been pointed out on the application. And then the yellow line here indicates the historic Barlow Road corridor, which, as you'll see, comes out of the subdivision to the east. And within this corridor easement, the city has a code that says that you can't put structures in that easement. They have to be kept visually open. It does allow for such things as roads, fences, and landscaping, and those kinds of things. And several subdivision applications which have the historic Barlow corridor on them have been reviewed and approved by the city and by the Historic Review Board, provided that they do not change the historic Barlow Road corridor easement. And the city has adopted overlay district regulations which apply to steep slopes and geologic hazards and limit development and make sure that there are additional engineering and construction standards for public facilities and houses and private development in these kinds of areas. Similarly, we have an overlay district which protects inventoried streams and wetlands and those sorts of things. And then the historic overlay district includes the Barlow Road corridor and provides for a mechanism for review by the Historic Review Board and by staff to make sure that that corridor is maintained. As I mentioned, this annexation includes a zone change, and the code section that applies here is 1768.025, zoning changes for land annexed into the city. And this provides that in the city-county UGB area, when you have a comprehensive plan designation of low-density residential, that an automatic default rezoning to the lowest density zone district is applied following annexation. And the city is required to apply the R10 zone upon annexation without discretion. It does require that the transportation system plan and transportation planning rule compliance is shown for a zone change. And there are conditions of approval applied to the zone change at this point, which we will talk about later. So that section of code requires a concurrent zone change when the land that's subject to the annexation is designated by the city's comprehensive plan. And the use of the term shall in the code suggests that the rezoning is mandatory and not subject to the normally highly discretionary criteria contained within our code for typical rezoning. Such an approach makes sense because the R10 development or R10 zone district is fully contemplated and planned for in our city's comprehensive plans and public facilities planning, and makes the act of rezoning largely ministerial. Normally, the discretionary zone change criteria are not applicable in this case, but as a practical matter, they mirror the annexation factors that I mentioned previously. They're very similar, and as a result, we feel, as staff and the applicant is making this case, that those criteria would be satisfied with the exception of transportation impacts, which are dealt with through a condition of approval. So with respect to water, sewer, and storm public facilities planning, we have a water distribution master plan, we have the sanitary sewer master plan, stormwater and grading design standards, and the annexation area was included in these public facilities plans listed above. In my staff report, I've detailed the specific sections of each of these plans that apply to the extent that an annexation is a very long-range plan. You have public facilities planning, and there'll be much tighter analysis if and when a development proposal comes forward in this annexation area. But in general, the public facilities plans anticipate the demand that would be placed on public facilities by a rezoning to R10 and identifies recommended improvements intended to serve that area. Additionally, NX properties are required to construct or pay fee in lieu for any necessary city public facilities to serve the site, as well as paying applicable system development charges with each new building permit. And the point of that is that the time at which an impact happens is when a building permit is approved. And subsequently, we have a long-standing policy of allowing system development charges to be used as a basis for adequacy of findings of public facilities, in addition to normal codified exactions, dedications, and public facilities requirements. And the staff report has details in it for those specific improvements. To transportation, the transportation impact analysis and transportation planning rule analysis complies with the city's guidelines. John Replinger, the city's transportation planning consultant, is here this evening to answer any detailed questions about the TIA and TPR analysis that was prepared by the applicant. Lancaster Engineering prepared these documents for review by the city. The city's transportation system plan was adopted in 2013 and identifies specific improvements to serve the site. The TSP is codified through our Public Streets Code, Chapter 12.04. That code applies when a development is proposed. It requires such things as new dedication of public streets that meet specific separation from other public streets, connectivity to the site, through the site, not just vehicular, but bicycle and pedestrian as well. The TIA submitted by the applicant assumes a future development proposal of approximately 121 homes and analyzed 3 intersections impacted by the zone change. There were 2 key intersections which failed to meet adopted performance standards at the intersections of Highway 213 and Redland Road and the Redland Road, Holcomb Boulevard, Abernathy Road intersection. And subsequently, the city's transport consultant, John Replinger, recommended a condition of approval, which we'll go into. And this condition requires that only development that is permitted under the current zoning, which is FU10, would be allowed until elements such as financially constrained projects and alternative mobility standards are identified and adopted through the Oregon 213 refinement plan. This essentially means that the city will need to update its TSP through a legislative process and identify further improvements through what's called our alternative mobility study and refinement plan. and then implement those through a code amendment process prior to allowing any development associated with the zone change. And the complete text of condition number 14 is provided in the recommended findings. With respect to police, fire and emergency, and schools, the Oregon City Police Department will serve the property upon annexation. Clackamas Fire District Number 1 will continue to provide fire and EMT service, and the site is already within the Oregon City School District. The city provided notice of the annexation to all affected agencies and has received no comments objecting to the proposal at this time. With respect to parks, trails, and open space, we reviewed the 1999 and 2008 Parks Master Plan. There are no parks identified on the subject property, but the Park Place neighborhood in general was listed as underserved by parks and recreation facilities based on a level of service study that was done. The Trails Master Plan indicates a future trail system for the property which would connect conceptually through the Holcomb Ridge area to Holcomb Elementary School through a combination of off-street trails and on-street paths. Most likely the trail system in this area would be associated with the public sidewalk system, either through a wider sidewalk system or potentially through the Barlow Road corridor. The nearby Park Place concept plan area south of Holcomb Boulevard indicates the need for a future large regional park of 8 to 10 acres. That's an area that's not yet annexed to the city yet. It is an application that we have submitted to us, but it's been deemed incomplete and be coming forward before you at a later time. Parks system
Could you
development.
repeat that?
The Park Place concept plan
No,
annexation
the
south
one that
of.
you said was incomplete, and we'll be seeing it later. I
Yes.
just missed that.
Yes, for annexation south of Holcomb Boulevard.
Okay.
And it extends from Livesey Road up to Holcomb Boulevard. Currently incomplete. Developers also contribute a specific park system development charge, which is currently approximately $4,200 per building permit, along with any development exactions and dedications permitted by code. And I've detailed a lot of the information about how the parks SDC is, the amount is prepared every year in your staff report. It's pegged to the construction price index as well as to the Clackamas County assessor database, I believe. Additional considerations with respect to this annexation are what a lot of people have been commenting on. Senate Bill 1573 with respect to voter approval. The applicant is going to share some information with you this evening on a recent development with respect to that bill. The bill states that if an annexation is within an urban growth boundary, has a comprehensive plan designation, is contiguous to a city limit, and otherwise meets any applicable ordinances, then it can bypass a voter approval process. And Oregon City is a city that has a charter that requires voter approval of annexations, provided they meet with state law. So there'll be some discussion about that later. And also what the refinement plan for 213 might entail and what the status of the alternative mobility study will entail are also considerations for you this evening. With respect to public involvement and comments, we've had several public hearings already. The applicant attended 2 separate Park Place Neighborhood Association meetings, one with the annexation and the second when the annexation was revised to include the zone change. Public comments at the Planning Commission and City Commission have been entered into the record. We today received 5 written comments from the people listed here, which are in your packet. And those comments received include concerns about traffic congestion, school capacity, property taxes, voter approval, air quality, noise, topography, parks, sewer, and water capacity. Staff's recommendation for the Planning Commission this evening is to consider the annexation and then at some point make a recommendation on this proposal regarding how it has or has not complied with the factors set forth in our code. We've prepared draft findings and stand ready to adjust those if need be. If the Planning Commission sends forward a positive recommendation, then the staff further recommends that the Planning Commission forward the proposed findings and reasons for decision 1 through 14 for adoption by the City Commission. And that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any more detailed questions you have.
Gentlemen, do you have any questions of staff at this time?
I got a question of the city attorney. Bill, is there anything that would prevent us, that's before the courts now, in this annexation question, that would prevent us from taking action on this? Are we getting the cart before the horse here from a legal standpoint?
No, I don't think there's anything, there's certainly nothing that has been filed against the City of Oregon City that would have a stay or preclude us from taking action on it. What is going on is there are a number of challenges that have been before the courts on 1573, but none of those challenges have affect the ability of the city to take action.
So right now, the law of the land is what the legislature has approved, that we can proceed on the basis of what they passed.
That's correct.
And if the court overturns that, then would that jeopardize our action tonight and render it null and void?
There's a variety of different ways in which this could come up, and it'd be really hard to anticipate exactly how that would happen. I think the most likely thing would be, as I think the applicant will address at some point, Lynn County Court recently made a decision that said that 1573 is effective and that the city of Corvallis and some other cities will have to annex things without sending it to the voters. I assume somebody's probably going to appeal that, and that's probably going to take a year or two for it to work its way through the system. Should Oregon City follow 1573 and send it, not send it to the voters, I would expect that there's a possibility of an appeal there or some type of action. And if that happens, we'd have to see what the posture is and how that works. And if in fact there's some way it would have to be unraveled. But it's just really difficult to foresee exactly how that's going to play out. What I would suggest that you concentrate instead on is the criteria that are in the code and in Metro's code, and look at those and evaluate whether or not this application meet those.
Thank you.
Well, just to follow up with his question, I know there was a concern because we do have a charter, and in terms of the hierarchy of regulations, the charter is the top and everything else follows under it. So there's obviously some concern by not only members of the community, but I think members of the Planning Commission, that we have a charter provision that directs certain actions regardless of what the state law says.
I guess I would characterize it a little bit differently.
I'm just saying what I've been hearing. So
yeah, and the charter provision actually doesn't say regardless of what state law says. It says except as otherwise mandated by state law, things have to be sent to the voters. And there is a concept known as preemption, which the state can preempt city actions on certain areas. However, the closer they get to the core of the city's political method of forming itself, the less the state can preempt, and it's a very gray area.
Yes, very gray.
It's not black and white.
Yeah.
But one of the other things to keep in mind is that courts have said that there is no municipal right to annexation. Right. But at the same time, if you're talking about how the boundary, who is in the city and who is out, it sure feels pretty core. So exactly how those interplay someone's going to have that fight of the Court of Appeals and probably the Supreme Court.
And one more item to note regarding the Senate bill is that we have passed an annexation utilizing that Senate bill as well.
Okay. That's helpful. Thanks, you guys.
Zach, you have any questions for Pete?
Not at this time.
Paul?
Just a quick one. Pete, you had mentioned SDCs as findings for approval for inadequate facilities. So, I may have
If
gotten that
I-
wrong. I wasn't really sure what
I
that meant.
don't mean to put it that way.
Okay.
We have made findings for approval of annexations partially based on a recognition that future building permits are responsible for paying system development charges
Okay.
in the past.
Okay.
Yeah.
Damon?
Two things. One, I would have liked to have seen this week's agenda and on all the items to have included the staff report. The idea of having to go back through various meetings to find the original staff report is cumbersome, and so it would be nice for it to carry forward as the continuations push dates forward. That's just an observation. I'm not gonna.
This staff report,
We didn't have one last time.
we didn't have one before.
Right, but
Yeah.
there isn't one in here either.
Oh, you mean on this?
On the dice?
There's
It's recommended findings.
right, but it
Yeah.
isn't
He
staff report.
he wanted the whole thing. It isn't on for us to pull up and look at on the screen.
It
Should
isn't.
be.
Okay.
It's the second document in
Isn't
the
that it?
list.
Right, I
It's-
understand, but normally it's called staff report. So people who've been coming and are paying attention look for staff report. When they see recommended findings, what they've seen from us in the past is it's a one-page document where we're catching up on all of our, findings from the past. So, and then the other thing is, do you have a slide in your PowerPoint that has the annexation criteria that we're supposed to consider?
Yes.
I think that was from last time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
just useful to have that
Sure.
up so that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
Okay.
agree. Yep.
Thank you. That's
Sure.
it.
Thanks.
Okay. I just have a couple, Pete. On your existing conditions section on page 6 of your staff report, I am wondering if you can add in, you didn't, and I wrote a comment on the side that said, I knew the Barlow Road corridor was in this vicinity, but you didn't mention it as part of the existing conditions, and I think it should be
okay.
it should be mentioned there because there's no connection between what's under that part and then getting to the other part in the back where you do talk about it. I also noticed the applicant didn't mention that in their staff report, in their report either, that the Barlow Road corridor.
Right.
And then I wanted to ask, so you are assuming, I'm assuming and you're assuming, so I'm just curious where the 121 number came.
The number of houses?
Yes, because
Okay.
obviously there's got to be some, let's see,
Basis.
well, no, not some basis. There's got to be some jerry-rigging around on the site because we need to make sure we maintain the Barlow Road
Sure.
corridor. Obviously, as you're aware, the Planning Commission has major concerns about wholesale removal of trees. Maybe there's going to be some trees left on the site. Maybe there's going to be a buffer. I don't know. The number seemed a little high to me.
The trip generation.
But
of-
it was just a question I had.
Yeah, it's right out of the applicant's transportation analysis on the
Okay.
trip generation.
That's where I thought it came
Assuming-
from.
Currently, under FU10 zoning,
Yeah,
FU10 zoning, you could have 3 houses,
sure.
and then the net new trips would be 121. So,
Perhaps the applicant can talk about it
Yeah.
in greater
Yeah.
detail during their presentation.
Then I had
You
just
have
wanted to
it.
ask a question on page 9 under your public notices. I was very pleased to see that notices had been sent to the Holcomb Outlook CPO and also to the Central Point / Leland / New Era CPO. Did we receive any comments from them at all?
no, we did not.
We did not. Okay, so that's unfortunate. I was
Although we
hoping
may have comments from people who are in those.
right, but
planning
not from the
organizations.
organization themselves.
Correct.
Okay. And then I also noted in the staff report that we unfortunately did not receive any comments from School District Number 1.
Not as of today.
That'd be It's actually 62.
62, number 1, whatever, okay.
It should be number 1.
It is number 1. As far as we're concerned, it is number 1. Let's see, I had one more question for you. Let me flip here quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of those note maker people, so
That's
I
good.
write little notes all over the margins. Let's see. Well, let me just, while I'm finding it, let me ask you another question about the Barlow Road corridor. I'm obviously familiar with past actions by the city on subdivision development with regard to that.
Mm-hmm.
So we will be, because there's no development proposed at this time, we will be looking at that, not we, but we, city, looking at that in terms of,
I think it's a recognition that it's an inventoried historic resource and that we have code that is adequate to ensure that that resource is protected as if development occurs on the subject site. The code for that is not in the record. Essentially,
right. Well, I guess it's,
yeah.
maybe it's just a little bit of a sort of projecting into the future, although not totally applicable to this, but I know one of the things that is under the Goal 5 resource is archaeological. So there
Sure.
could very well be
It could.
subsurface items. So if tree cutting, road building, whatever starts happening before that inventory work is done, then we maybe have lost something that we may
Yeah.
not have been aware of.
Correct. And that, with respect to the tree cutting, we should address that. Oregon City currently does not have any policies about that. It's under county zoning and county land use policies with respect to tree protection. We don't have a look-back policy that would penalize a prospective annexation applicant or require mitigation for such activities. If a private woodlot owner logs their property and it's permitted under county zoning, there's not a great deal that the planning staff in the city can do about it, under current zoning. So that's one of the complications and that sort of thing. That being said, annexations are highly discretionary decisions. So,
Well, I think, as we have done in the past, we have gotten that on the record because I think the prospective developer is very aware of our concern in that regard. So we're just saying it so that it gets repeated again, that when we see development, we get kind of crabby about
And in some jurisdictions, they don't allow annexation until everything's been replanted and fixed.
well, that's not us, but it's just for
Right.
the record. Okay.
Just so
Well,
you know.
I can't find the other little comment, but thank you. That clarifies several things for me. I appreciate it. Gentlemen, any last comments?
None.
Laura, may I ask you a question, please? We have our representative from the Oregon Department of Transportation, and for me, I guess it's kind of, to me, the information that they provide is also sort of part of the staff report in our, just supplementing as opposed to being strictly third-party testimony. Can I move that up to this portion of the report? Before we get to the applicant, because it seems to me it's hand in hand with what the items that Pete wrote in his staff report and would be probably more consistent rather than having it at the end or later. So Seth, do you feel comfortable coming up now?
It's up to your discretion.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate it. It is related to everything else that Pete's talked about so adequately, and just would help us out a lot. So, guys, I'm assuming that's okay. I didn't ask your permission first. I should have asked first.
No. Yeah.
Thank you very much,
Yeah, no
Seth.
problem. I'm Seth Brumley with the Oregon Department of Transportation. I'm a planner there. And I'd like to thank the city for coordinating with the state on these land use processes, and thank the Planning Commission for letting me participate in the hearing. And I assume you all have a copy of the letter, so I'll just go ahead and read that into the record. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on AN 160004/ZC 160001 a 35.65 acre annexation with potential impacts on a state highway, Oregon 213. The Oregon Department of Transportation appreciates the city's continued commitment to addressing mobility and safety needs of the highway through its transportation system plan, land use actions, and development review. ODOT has worked closely with the city on both this zone change and on the ongoing Oregon 213 refinement plan. Based on staff findings, ODOT has no objection to this proposal. The city staff findings state that only development permitted under the current zoning will be allowed until elements such as financially constrained projects and alternative mobility standards are identified and adopted through the refinement plan. Furthermore, these solutions will be implemented through amendments to Municipal Code Chapter 12.04. This ensures that additional trips allowed through the zone change are accounted for in the city's transportation system plan and implementing ordinances before the new zoning can go into effect. Thank you for providing ODOT the opportunity to participate in this land use review. If you have any questions regarding this matter, please ask me.
Guys, any questions of ODOT staff?
Got a question. Your participation in this refinement plan at 213, give us a projected completion date on your efforts. Because I know you want to cooperate with us.
We definitely want to cooperate with you, but I am personally not involved in that effort. I've coordinated with the people who are, and some of the people here on the Planning Commission may be more familiar with that, but I know there's meetings this week for that to proceed, but I'm not sure when the completion date is.
I could jump in if you like.
If you please.
Sure. We are doing a community meeting regarding alternate mobility targets to look at the corridor of Highway 213 from Abernathy to Malala Avenue and look at any potential congestion along that way in the long-term plan. So in the TSP, we look forward a significant amount of time, and we want to make sure that we meet our mobility targets or acceptable level of congestion during that time frame. As a part of the TSP adoption, we couldn't meet it for a couple of intersections, well, for Beaver Creek and 213, and so we adopted a plan that said we need to work on the study. The study has been in the works for a while, but we recently started, I think December was our first meeting. We created a technical advisory team as well as a citizen advisory team. Those groups have already met once. Again, they're meeting the second time this week. We anticipate going maybe into the early summer with these meetings. Then we will do a legislative amendment to the TSP and to our code to implement whatever comes out of that. And so that will come before the Planning Commission. If the Planning Commission moves it forward, it'll go before the City Commission. If the City Commission moves it forward, then we'll have to go through a whole another review process with the Oregon Transportation Commission. There's potential for appeals throughout these different review processes, so it'll take a while till it is complete. A while. So probably, end of the year 2017 for local adoption, then OTC.
So, and if I was reading correctly, the zone change, the applicant was requesting to have the zone change deferred until all this work was done? Is
That's-
I see the head shaking. Okay.
That-
I got that wrong. I'll hear
Yeah,
from you and
the
hopefully
the
we'll
applicant
get
can
that
come
right.
up and
All right.
explain in a
All
bit
right,
more
perfect.
detail.
All right.
So Seth, just to reiterate, you don't have any concerns on traffic on state roads at the current level of development, which is R10.
FU10.
FU10.
Yeah, just the way that the TPR works, the Transportation Planning Rule, if the intensity isn't changing, then we consider that not a significant effect to the transportation system.
Right.
So you've already analyzed it given the existing zoning designations and
Right.
So was your question leading to
No.
future, or just what it is right
No,
this minute?
just reiterating.
So I don't know if this is a question for you, Seth, or it's a question for Pete or for both of you. So all of the information that was currently submitted on transportation was all forwarded to ODOT for their review?
Yes, it was.
Because they obviously identified some problems, as did John.
Correct. Well, I mean, we didn't identify them, but through the analysis.
So the criteria or the factor is the TPR compliance, and that's what we're looking at, not the existing
Okay.
level of congestion,
All right.
just that criteria.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming out of order, or whatever order it was.
No problem.
Right, gentlemen, are you ready to proceed?
Yes.
Okay. All right, call the applicant's representatives.
Chairman Griff. Chairman Griff, before I sit down, I'm going to pass a letter to Mr. Weisman, so or Laura. I've already given copies of the letter to all the staff present tonight, including Mr. Brumley.
Rick, I don't think you filled out a card, so be sure to do that.
I don't think the applicant had to do that, but I'd be happy to give you one.
Well, yes, they...
Pretty sure you know where to find me.
Well, no, I don't, not exactly, but yes, they want them for everybody.
Good evening, Chairman Griff, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Mike Robinson. I'm a land use attorney here tonight on behalf of the applicant. My mailing address is 1120 Northwest Cooch Street. Cooch is spelled C-O-U-C-H, 10th floor. Portland, Oregon, 97209-4128. With me tonight is Rick Evans, who's sitting to my left, and Mike Ard with Lancaster Engineering, who is behind us. Mike, as you heard earlier, is the transportation engineer that prepared the transportation impact analysis, which we may refer to tonight as the DIA. Rick is going to do the bulk of the presentation. I just have a few things I'd like to add before he begins. So we're really here for two reasons tonight. They may be hard to separate from one another, but I think it's important to tell you why we're here. The first is to demonstrate to your satisfaction by substantial evidence in the whole record that we've met our legal burden of proof. Applicant always has the burden of proof, and we accept that. And we think after you look at all of the evidence that's in the record and listen to our presentation and consider testimony by others, you'll be able to conclude as well that we met our burden of proof, demonstrating that the annexation should be approved. As Pete said, there is no discretionary criteria applied to the zoning map. The way zoning map application, the way your code works is if you have a specified comprehensive plan map designation, you apply a particular zone to it. That's R10 in this case. And the code says that you don't apply discretionary criteria in that case. Secondly, we appreciate, it may not seem apparent, but we do appreciate the fact that citizens take their time to write and to come to these meetings. We're paid to do it, they're not. And it's important that there be citizen involvement. So the second thing we're going to try and do tonight is hopefully answer their questions. I'm sure we won't be able to answer all of them, but we'll do our best. I think it's important also that as you listen to our testimony, if you would please, remember what Mr. Walter said earlier. This property has been in the urban growth boundary since 1979. That's 38 years. So this long ago, the city and the state said it's appropriate for urbanization. Annexation is the first step in that urbanization. And you might wonder why we don't have a subdivision, which is a development proposal before you, and that's really for two reasons. One is it's not allowed by state law. Land use subdivision is a limited land use decision. State law only allows concurrent zoning map applications and permits. So I view that as something nice that the legislature could fix in the future, but we're not able to do that. Secondly, we want to know that we're in the city and we have the zone in effect before we begin the subdivision work. And Chairman Griff, I just have a couple other things to add, and then I'll turn it over to Pete. So I gave you a letter tonight.
Rick? You mean Rick?
I'm sorry, Rick. Thank you.
That's
I gave
okay.
you a letter tonight that really has nothing new in it, with one exception, and that is a citation to the Benton County Circuit Court decision from last Friday. As you may have heard, City of Corvallis sued the state of Oregon over Senate Bill 1573. Both the city and the state filed what are called motions for summary judgment. It's a way to dispose of the lawsuit. The circuit court judge ruled on Friday that he would grant the state's motion. So I'm sure there will be an appeal, but what this means for now is that the judge agreed with the state's arguments about Senate Bill 1573, and he found, if you read his opinion, that it is not unconstitutional. It does not unconstitutionally usurp home rule authority. I think Bill, though, is absolutely correct. I'm sure the losing party will appeal. So it will go up to the Oregon Court of Appeals, and it would likely go to the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court accepts review. All of that's going to take a while. My answer to the question, if I were asked, that you asked your city attorney earlier, is you have to, under the goalpost rule, apply the standards that are in effect when we made our application. Senate Bill 1573 is in effect. Staff report has found, based on evidence in the record, that we meet the criteria for not sending the annexation to a vote of the people. So I don't think it, from my perspective, and I'm happy to discuss it with you if you find it helpful, I don't think what the court does in the future is really relevant. The other thing, Chairman Griffin, and I'll conclude, I just want to answer a couple of the questions that the Commission took the time to ask. The charter, you have two relevant charter provisions, and I've given these to you as Exhibit 4 to my letter. There's Section 3 boundaries and there's Section 4 powers of the city. Both of those effectively say that the charter is subject to state and federal law. You can talk to your city attorney more about that, but that was really the issue that was before the court that they ruled on Friday, and the court concluded that state law controls. And I think he cited a charter provision from the city of Corvallis that's quite close to your own, if not identical. The other two things I would say, and I just say this because I need to put this into the record, we appreciate the slide that Pete showed you that had the mapped resources on the site, and I think there's a natural resource zone at the north end of the site. There was a slope zone in the middle, and then the Barlow Trail corridor. I can assure you that when the applicant, if we have annexation and zoning map approval, when the applicant does the land division application, we will take all of those into account. We understand what our duty is to meet those approval criteria. I can tell you're concerned about trees, but I think Pete intentionally and Mr. Espy unintentionally described the current state of the law. Unlike a friendly city to the north, you don't have any provisions governing how trees might be considered annexation. So if you want to comment on it, of course that's appropriate, but it's not an approval criterion, and I don't think it's an approval criterion under 060 sub 6. The last thing I would say is I didn't see an identified Goal 5 archaeological resource on the map. If there is, we're happy to discuss it, but we're only subject to mapped resources. So I didn't see that, and I don't think that's a basis for the decision tonight. So I apologize for talking longer than I intended. I appreciate your courtesy in listening to me, and I'll turn it over to Rick now.
He's an attorney. You expect him to talk longer, right?
Can you hold on just a quick second?
Yep.
So, Laura, when are we going to have time to read this? I know it's not a full 12 pages, but there is obviously a lot of information there, and we just got it 5 seconds ago. So I just have a concern that we got more information that we may not have time. I'd like to be able to have time to read it, is guess what I'm asking.
So you can, for information submitted tonight, you can either read it tonight, or if there is a continuance, you could read it between now and the next hearing.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So could I
Please, Rick.
Let me just comment on that if I could, please. If someone asks that the hearing be continued or the record held open, you have to grant that because this is the initial evidentiary hearing. We understand that, and we'll certainly accommodate that request. But I guess my letter is no different than the other material that came in earlier today. I'm going to excuse myself for just a minute, and I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, for the record, I'm Rick Givens, I'm planning consultant for the applicants. I'm not going to go back and belabor all of the findings and information in support of our findings that is in the staff report and in our written narrative as well. But I would like to talk briefly tonight about the 7 factors that are listed on the screen above. Before I do that, though, I think I would like to add just a little bit about the forest, the tree issue. I can see that's a concern, and I believe Mike is absolutely correct and staff's correct that there is no ordinance provision. But I would like, just for your comfort factor, to make sure you understand that the Sears family has owned this property for well over 100 years, and they have maintained it in resource land. They have farmed it. They have planted trees, and they have watched those trees grow. They have agricultural and timber deferral on the properties. They are the ones who are conducting the harvesting of some of the trees. There's no developer in contract on the property, so I just thought you should know this. This is not an effort by a developer to skirt compliance with your tree ordinances. This is something that they are doing as land managers. And if, in talking with Mr. Sears, who's here tonight, they have worked with the state forestry department and gotten all permits and everything necessary to do that. So that's simply just because you were talking about it, I wanted to amplify on Mike's remarks on that. But looking at annexation factor number 1, and I guess one more thing I just would like to talk about just in general, that this is always gets kind of awkward when people in the audience are assuming that annexation means development is happening, and there's this kind of confusion about how this may or may not lead to future approval of a subdivision. We all know that annexation has to happen before development can occur, as the City of Oregon City is the acknowledged jurisdiction that would have control over land use in this area. But this is only a first step, and we understand that as applicants. We understand, as Laura was mentioning in her testimony, that we're roughly, probably almost a year away from the city doing anything regarding alternative mobility standards. We are accepting a condition of approval that is proposed to be attached to the zone change that would preclude any development beyond what's allowed under the county's FU10 zoning until such time as that whole issue is resolved. We understand that there'll be some time period after that, so we're looking at at a minimum of a year, and who knows how long after that before any appeals and discussion are resolved. So this is not something that's going to trigger an immediate application for a subdivision. Rather, this is a natural step that occurs under the city's joint urban growth management agreement with Clackamas County, that properties that have been in the urban growth boundary for a period of time, as they become ripe, as services advance to that area, it becomes natural for them to be annexed to the city, and then the city takes over land use control. And that's what's happening here. But as far as adequacy of access to the site, we have direct access to Holcomb Boulevard, which is a minor arterial street, and the TIA that's submitted here talks about that. I'm not going to go into that. If you have questions about that aspect of it, I'll let Mike Ard from Lancaster Engineering talk about that, but we do have the necessary access that is available to the site. We also have access at the southeast corner of the site to a little half street, Kalin Drive, that comes out of the Barlow Crest development, and that could probably provide for some vehicular connection. It would probably be limited at this point, but at least at the bare minimum it would be emergency vehicle access. We anticipate that we would be providing street stubs so that in the future, when the urban growth boundary is amendment, an eventual connection can be made to Ames Street. But the fact of the matter is that, as with all development that goes on, it's kind of a little bit of a messy process in that the developer has to do certain things, the city has to do certain things before an area that is available for development. In this case, adequate access is available, however. We've already talked in my narrative and in Pete's staff report about conformance with the city's comprehensive plan. I'm not going to go into that. But I think the main thing I've heard in the opposition testimony that's come in is universal concern about adequacy and availability of public facilities and services. So that's the main thing I'd like to talk about tonight. Water is a little bit unusual for this site in that the city has an agreement with Clackamas River Water District that kind of splits this property in half. The upper part above elevation 450 would be serviced by Clackamas River Water. The lower portion is will be serviced by the City of Oregon City. In the pre-application conference that we had, staff from Clackamas River Water attended, and they noted that there were improvements that are needed to their system, both in terms of transmission lines and in storage capacity. There's a subdivision that was recently approved, Abernathy Landing, that's something like 98 lots, I believe. And there's, talking with Laura Turway tonight, some requirement for them to work with Clackamas River Water and perhaps do some of those improvements it would be understood that, we would have the same concerns and that it would be a developer expense in working with Clackamas River Water to make sure that adequate water was available. It also would be possible to develop this property in phases such that the lower portion is developed first, which has full access to City of Oregon city water. And that is fully available and adequate to meet the needs of the proposed development in the future. Regarding sewer service, that's readily available as well. There's a city sewer line in Holcomb Boulevard that will handle the southerly portion of the site, southwest corner, and then the northerly portion of the site would drain over to Ames Street to a sewer that's stubbed in that street, and the applicant's own intervening property, and would, now and again, it would be a developer expense to extend sewer to this site. Storm drainage is a concern, I know, for people who live on Ames, because they've had problems with the storm detention facilities in that area overflowing at times when it rains a lot. And we've looked at that issue, and we can provide access with the development of this property as a developer expense through property that the Sears family owns, a drainage system that would go to the north and to a natural drainage way on the other side of Forsyth. So we anticipate that that would be handled through developer improvements and would not be any impact at all on the existing city system. It would just be a new system that would drain to a natural drainage way after, of course, we do the normal things in terms of low-impact development streets, in terms of the requirement for providing storm detention and treatment, all of those kinds of things. So I think the last one that I'm going to address tonight is the issue of schools, because I know a lot of people have had concerns about capacity and there only being one elementary school in the area. I talked with Wes Rogers of Oregon City Schools. I sent him some information he requested regarding the number of units we were anticipating, not only on this annexation, but also the other one on the Park Place side of the south side of Holcomb Boulevard that will be coming in at some point here. You asked, about the 121 lots, or 124, with 121 being the number over the 3 that are allowed under the existing zoning. That was a simple calculation of subtracting 20% for infrastructure improvements, which is a fairly standard number used in planning practice, and then dividing the balance of the property by 10,000 square feet. So we don't have a development plan at this point. That's just an attempt. If anything, it would be on the high side, because as you notice, there are issues on the property that will have to be dealt with in terms of the NROD boundary, in terms of the steep sloped area, in terms of the Barlow corridor, all those kinds of things that could reduce that number. But that's the high end. So I think we're safe in using that in assessing the impact of this project. I expected there to be a letter from the school district here tonight, but in as much as there's not, I'm going to give you the letter that I sent to Mr. Rogers. And also a copy of, I hate to do this to you, Chairman McGriff, but this is a study. This is a study that was done for Oregon City School District by Portland State University, and looking at a forecast of school needs in the area. And I will give that to Pete, and I'll also give you additional copies of my letter. Make sure I kept one for myself. I don't have enough for everybody there, but.
Thank you, Rick.
Oh, one more thing, Pete, sorry.
Oh, wait, there's more.
Yes.
This is just a screenshot off of the school district's website for Holcomb Elementary. And the only reason I'm providing it to you is it notes the school enrollment, at least at the start of the year, was 500 students. In looking at 124 lots potentially being on this property in the future, the estimation of school students that would be using Oregon City Public Schools is based on the information provided in Table 9 of that report that I just submitted. And basically, what they are saying is that for newer homes, homes built within about the last 10 years, they generate for kindergarten through 6th grade elementary school about 0.28 students per household. Grades 7 to 8 being middle school, about 0.08 students per household, and high school about 0.14. So about a half a student per household. Now, I know that everybody kind of wonders about that, but that's fairly. I've done this in a lot of different places, and that's pretty standard assumptions being made for school planning. And while it may not track with what you would think of in terms of single-family development, when you consider the fact that people start buying a home at around age 25 or so, and 25 to 30, and still are in single-family homes until they're 75, or in the case of my mother-in-law, 88, there's 50-plus years of owning a home, and probably only about a third of that to a half at most do you have kids in school. So that's, and not everybody has kids. We have empty nesters. We have, at any rate, this is standard information. It's what Oregon City Public Schools has used. And so in terms of this, the Sears property would be expected to generate roughly 35 elementary school students, 10 middle school students, and 17 high school students. When I talked to Mr. Rogers, he indicated that there is capacity in the Holcomb Elementary School facility. In fact, if you look at that study I just gave you on table 20, on page 35, it says that for Holcomb Elementary School, they anticipated there being, get this right, in 2016-17, 558 students. In fact, as shown on the school website, they're under that. There hasn't been as much as expected. Mr. Rogers also indicated that the school district is aware of growing needs for schools, and will be bringing a bond measure before the city in the fall. There are plans under discussion to convert Ogden Middle School eventually to an elementary school and build a new middle school facility. And I just would point out that in looking at the population forecast models that were done here, it was based upon the urban growth boundary that was in effect. So this property has been in the urban growth boundary. We're not adding something new. This land was intended to be developed for urban facilities, so it would be expected that this development would have been accounted for in the school district's planning for for students. So all of that says is that there's existing capacity, that this property, when it develops, is going to be at probably 1 to 2 years away for a first phase. We would expect it to be a 2 to 3 phase project. So we're not looking at an immediate impact, but it would be spread out over several years, and that the impact would be within the expected capacity of Holcomb Elementary. Long term, there are plans to add more capacity in the area. Also talked about ORS, Chapter 222 in the Metro Code in the staff report and in my narrative. I'm not going to talk about that. I think the last thing I really want to talk about is natural hazards. The steep sloped area is very small. We don't anticipate any difficulty in working with that. I noticed that several of you pointed out the fact that the land was pretty wet when you were on the site. I just would point out that an article in the Oregonian here about the 21st said that we had achieved the wettest February on record in the more than 100 years they've kept records, I believe it was. And that was a week of rain ago. So this is an especially wet period that you're on the property. The area does not have any known wetlands on it. There's nothing on the city's inventory that indicates wetlands. There's a wetland potentially at least off-site mapped on the city mapping with the NROD boundary. We would work with that. That's most likely the area where we would do our storm detention and treatment. There would be no houses in that area. So we expect to deal with those things. I think that concludes everything, unless you've got something else you'd like me to hit, Mike?
No, I don't.
Glad to answer any questions you may have.
I have one quick one in my walk around on the site, and you may not be able to answer this. It looked like there'd been a fire there, like half the trees were burned, but yet, in all my other research, I didn't see anything, and so.
Let me check, because I don't know anything about that.
It's not critical. I'm just curious as to whether it was a natural or unnatural thing. Like, we did a bonfire and it was too close to the trees, so they're singed, or.
You saw it. It must have been.
The Sears family indicates there's been no fire on the property, so I'm not sure if that was maybe a different site you were looking at, or
I
just something
was
that.
standing in Holcomb Elementary looking right through the chain link fence, and there was black tree up to a certain point, then green, and it was very charred looking, so.
Well, I don't know anything about it, and neither do they, so.
Okay, well, it's fine. I mean, I just, didn't know if they'd done brush burning, or if it was just something that was 35 years ago when the tree was, so.
Hard to say.
All right, that's fine, thanks. It's kind of irrelevant, but still curious, I guess.
Anything else?
Questions, gentlemen? You asked your question?
At this point, yeah.
I think that I appreciate your interpretation and your comment to us about the weather report, because I saw the same thing. But we have received previous testimony here at the commission about water. I don't know what direction is. So the site's here, coming from up here down. So we know that there's been water. There's water in the area. There's some water issues, and I think you stated that in your report, that you said the Ames Street areas had problems.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime you have a hillside that's not developed, and that is, parts of it at least have been farmed, and so there's been, at times, soil, is open, no plant material on it to hold things up. You always have water running downhill. And I'm just saying there are no inventoried wetlands on the property. But we understand that when we do an application, we've got to deal with all those provisions, and we will do that. But this isn't the time or the place to get into that, and certainly not off of hearsay type of information, because the city's GIS mapping shows nothing. And we're pretty familiar with it, and they farm it, and there's no issue regarding wet areas. In the summer, at least.
Yeah, we'll have a question for you on page 10 of your statement, your submittal. You
Okay.
mention here that future development plans for this property will include the required information to address these constraints. These constraints are, however, minor in nature and can be accommodated through typical development practices. I have no idea what typical development practices are.
Well, when I'm talking about typical development practices, I'm talking about the fact that the city has a land development code that requires that we do a lot of different things. Probably what I was referring to there specifically were the hillside, which there, and we have to have, if we're going to develop on an area over 25%, we have to have a geotech report done. And if there's something found there that where we have to do some specific things regarding foundations or drainage or whatever, the recommendations of the engineering report would have to be followed in any development. Or on the other hand, it's a relatively small area. We may decide to make that open space. We may decide to just make that backyards. So I can't tell you, but I'm just saying those are the kind of typical development practices. The other thing I was probably referring to was storm drainage. The fact that we have to, by code, collect all of the storm drainage from the property, and according to city code, typically they're requiring that we do low impact design, which means we have roadside swales and all those things to slow down the rate at which water runs off of the property, that we provide for an area for stormwater detention and treatment consistent with the city code, and that we do a downstream analysis to show that we can get water off of the site in a way that it won't impact downstream properties. So all of those things are what I was talking about in terms of standard development processes.
Along with that, I guess to challenge you a little bit, your requirement is to not increase the downstream impact on sites. Based on what I saw today, there's already significant downstream impact on sites. Just and it could be coming from above you and through you, and I'm just saying that in my walking around Holcomb and the Ames area and all that, there is a lot of standing water.
Yeah.
And while February might be the wettest month we've had on record, it doesn't mean that March won't be bad, and September next year, and February next year, and year and year.
But the,
so
the thing
let me finish.
Okay, sorry.
So what you've told me so far with what you said is, we're really sorry that your house got washed away in the 100-year flood, but you don't have to worry about it for another 100 years. And then 30 years later, the 100 years flood came again to Oregon City.
No, I'm not saying that at all. So let me amplify
Okay.
on that then. A, there's no 100-year flood impact. This thing is not in the 100-year floodplain. Okay?
I really hope not.
There is no 100-year floodplain on this property. The city's GIS mapping is very clear on that. There's no source of water that would impact this property in terms of 100-year flooding. What we have is a situation where there is poor drainage off of an area because you've got water running down the hill and it hits in pools because it's flat and been tilled and those kinds of things. It happens in the winter. We'll be improving that because we'll be collecting the water as it comes down the hill and taking it to a detention area. So those areas that are wet now won't be wet in the future. Those areas that are wet now are not wet to the extent that they would be considered a wetland, because there's not just a matter of hydrology in the winter. There's also a factor of soils. There's also a factor of plant vegetation, all those kinds of things. So those don't exist on this property. It's tilled, it's farmed. There are no wetlands species on the property. Any pooling that's there is just a brief period during these times when there's heavy rain.
Okay, so I know that we're going to talk about stormwater mitigation on the site as a part of future development. It's not really relevant to the annexation. But what I do want to hear about, and what I haven't really heard very much about, are the existing stormwater facilities up in that area that will accept the stormwater that's coming off that site.
Could I ask you to put up the map that you had that showed the site and the surrounding area? Not that one.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
This one?
The aerial will probably be better.
Okay. Yeah.
Doesn't go quite far enough north, unfortunately, but if you look on the map there and see where it says city boundary, it separates this property between Holcomb Elementary School and this site. If you were to extend that to the north, the Sears family owns that adjoining property all the way out to Forsyth Road.
Are you pointing to that? I was going to say, Pete,
Yeah.
are you pointing to that? Thank you, Pete.
That's the other property the Sears family owns.
Yeah.
And that is all downhill. And the objective is to get the water off-site and to the Clackamas River without flooding anybody. And we traversed that entire property with Mr. Sears on last fall with Bruce Goldson of Theta Engineering, and we looked at conceptually what can be done. And there's very possible to ditch along that roadway all the way out to Forsyth Road and then take a bend to the left and along Forsyth Road, and then across the street there's a natural drainage way which would then flow directly to the Clackamas River.
Will you have to acquire easements from other private property owners to build that stormwater?
They own the property and can grant the easement to themselves or to the developer.
themselves, yes.
As far as stormwater, once they get across the street, it's right at the right-of-way of Forsyth, and would just be releasing it to the natural drainage way. I think they even own the piece right across the street at the beginning of the drainage way, if my recollection is correct. Yes. So I mean, there's no problem in getting an easement to the natural drainage way, and since that is the way the water naturally tends to go, it's in the same water basin, there's no problem with it going that way. We won't be impacting any existing city facilities because it will be a new system that we developed. both under city auspices and under Clackamas County's auspices, since part of it's outside the city limits.
If I may just reiterate what Commissioner Espy said, that we want to sort of stick to the approval criteria. And
Right.
we're getting a little bit in the weeds with development proposal, and there is no development proposal.
But,
Yeah.
and nonetheless, annexations do look at adequacy of public facilities. And we would look at downstream or available public facilities. We do understand that once it develops, it will adhere to stormwater requirements, on site, and how to handle that stormwater as it comes off the site. But then, I do want to know what kind of facilities are up there and how that's all going to be handled.
Commissioner Espy, I thought your question was reasonable. I agree we have to be conscious about what we're asking, but I thought it was reasonable. It relates to 14040602, which is the feasibility to provide adequate public facilities at time of development. I think Rick's answer gives you the evidence that allows you to make that finding. If you annex the site, it's feasible to develop with, among other public facilities, stormwater.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 'Tis the season.
Any other
Yeah.
questions?
But I guess it's just to amplify, basically, we're aware of the concern about people on Ames Street, and we intend to develop a system that takes the water entirely away from them, so that there is no impact on that area. But again, all that's in the subdivision
Right.
application.
Right.
We just need to show you that it's
Yeah.
conceptually feasible. It is.
Okay.
Anyway, thank you, Rick, and I do appreciate your comments about the trees, but as I said before, we're putting it on the record again, regardless of whether we have criteria or standards with regard to that. It is a concern of this commission, and I just want to make sure that that's on the record for people to know. But anyway, thank you for your very thorough presentation. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your questions.
Thank you. And I will fill out a card.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Staff will certainly appreciate it.
Did have some extra.
So we've gotten another
I found some
big
here.
piece of information to take a look at, and a couple of memos.
From the school district.
Yes, and the memo to the school district, which unfortunately we don't have time to read right now. But before we get
Okay.
into the public testimony, I just want to say for the record, thank you to the people who submitted information ahead of time. We really appreciate it. And I will go now to the cards. And you want us to have people come up, a couple of people at a time? Would that help streamline things,
Is that your discretion?
guys?
Let's do that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so let's have Christine Kaczynski and Bob LaSalle come on up, please. And you can fight over whoever wants to go first. So we can do rock, paper, scissors. Just give us a second here. We've got some more information coming.
I will need one of these copies back for staff,
Okay.
and I'll make copies.
Okay. Thank you again, Rick. You don't have to give that one to me, Pete. You can hang on to that.
Okay, in that case, I'll send these around.
We will have a 5-minute stretch break later, folks. Just so you know. Go, Mr. Maybe. Okay, who wants to go first?
Christine.
I'm the one to start it.
Okay.
Thank you, Christine.
Christine Kaczynski, unincorporated Clackamas County. Before I begin my testimony, I would like to ask that the hearing stay open and continued due to the plethora of information that's being presented tonight. I believe that it would be good for the Planning Commission to have time to review everything. Thank you. The city can only approve annexation when all 7 annexation factors can be met. The city is unable, in my mind, to meet 6 of the 7 factors found in city code, and I've listed those for you. I realize that Holly Lane is not, or that Park Place plan is not part of this annexation. However, without the Holly Lane extension, development on Holcomb would have to be pared back a lot. So I'm talking to you about Holly Lane extension. Two of the largest issues facing the city in developing here is the lack of a good transportation plan, as current traffic on Holcomb is jeopardizing the safety of the people. Second, landslides and steep slopes here must be considered, since the city plans to use Holly Lane extension as an avenue to take excess traffic from Holcomb Boulevard. The problem is that the city has never proved that Holly Lane extension can even be built within the boundaries of the Park Place plan, where 35 extensive landslides exist. During concept planning, many citizens requested geological studies of the area, but the city authorized only a minimal preliminary study performed by GRI, Geotechnical. GRI recommended that the city require a geotechnical evaluation as part of any future development in areas with slopes of 15% or steeper. My question is, why hasn't the city changed its landslide regulations to read 15% or steeper as recommended? Landslides on Holly Lane occurred on slopes of 11%, with many landslides in the Park Place concept plan being only on 10 to 20% slope. So why does the city continue to regulate only slopes of 25% or greater when most landslides are occurring on much less slope? I would like to challenge the Planning Commission. In 2007, the City Commission made a trip out to the Park Place concept plan. They walked down Swan Avenue. They walked over to the bluff to see the drop down to Redland Road. They looked at the landslide area, which would need a huge bridge to cross that. When they came back, the City Commission was not quite so sure that the Holly Lane extension could safely be built. So I challenge each of you to make a trip up there, maybe as a group, see what your thoughts are. Can the Holly Lane extension be safely built? Before the city approves any further development, you owe it to your people to see if you can even safely build that extension. A complete, in-depth geological study should be ordered for the boundaries of the Park Place plan, and it would be good for GRI to perform the study again. Additionally, the city will not complete its study for the alternative mobility targets for several months
Christine,
until
your red
these
light is
outcomes
flashing.
are defined and until the city is able to finance the build-out of these targets to approve any development or annexations in the Holcomb, Redland, Holly, Maple Lane area is simply a waste of your time and money. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Hang
Christine.
on just a quick second, Bob. Pete, is there any chance you could put up the other map without the blue over the top of it?
Oh, yeah.
You had one that was a little bigger.
Da-da. I'm not sure.
There it is.
Yep.
Oh, that one.
Yep. Thank you.
Sure.
The elevation contours too.
Yeah, it's just a little bit bigger.
I like that.
And
That's good.
you have a little closer view of it than with the blue stuff. The blue stuff was good,
Okay.
just harder to see.
Yeah, I just gotta stamp it, otherwise I won't give it back.
Pete, did you say that you had a copy of what Christine handed out, or you needed one of them back?
I need that one back.
I gave my copy to, yeah, so Laura's got it.
Okay, so I want to make sure we didn't lose it.
We just have one copy of Bob's narrative here too, so
Okay.
I'll hand this out and I'd like this back.
Okay.
Okay.
I need to wait till he passes on some maps I have.
Okay, that's fine.
We
can,
have
you know,
several maps, so we can.
everyone sing to yourselves or something.
But thank you for having
I'm ready.
copies for everybody, appreciate that. That's
Yep.
much better than waiting while staff runs out, makes copies, comes back.
Well, we've done that.
Yes, but it slows things down.
Yeah.
Well, I can get started before I have to refer to the map, so.
Okay.
I'll go ahead. I'm claiming my time as chair of the Park Place.
That's fine. He's speaking on behalf of the neighborhood association.
And I'm referring to annexation factor number 3. I have some additional information garnered since the February 13th meeting. As you recall, I quoted chapter 14. Relevant factors to be considered are adequacy and availability of public facilities to serve potential development. A traffic study has since been performed and is pertinent information for your decision. I referenced the Lancaster Engineering Traffic Impact Study. Item number 2 states 91 additional trips affecting Holcomb Boulevard during morning peak hours, 121 additional trips affecting Holcomb Boulevard during evening peak hours, and 1,152 total daily trips. A lot of trips. Item number 5 states the intersection of Highway 213 at Redland Road and Redland Road at Holcomb Boulevard are expected to experience further degradation in performance upon development within the subject property. Possible mitigation includes the addition of an eastbound right turn lane on the Abernathy Road approach to Redland Road and providing 3 eastbound left turn lanes from Redland Road onto Highway 213. Good recommendations, but where is the money going to come from? On page 10, it notes that traffic on Holcomb Boulevard will be relieved once the Holly Lane extension is completed between Redland Road and Holcomb Boulevard. Well, the cost of that is estimated to be $18,620,000 for that Holly Lane extension. Now, where are we going to get the money for that? Page 17 referenced the intersection of Redland Road, Holcomb Boulevard, and Abernathy Road states, with the addition of site trips from the proposed annexation will cause failure of this intersection without further mitigation. In reference to the Replinger and Associates review of the traffic impact study of the Sears Farm annexation, item 8 states the development of the Sears Farm property is predicted to degrade the performance of the transportation system such that it would not meet applicable performance standards. 2 specific intersections were identified: Highway 213 and Redland Road, and the Redland Road, Holcomb Boulevard, Abernathy Road intersection. Further action will be required before development can be undertaken. This is new information since your last meeting and supports reasons to not allow annexation at this time. Let's get these issues figured out first, and then I think you'll have fewer people voicing objections. Now, do you all have your maps now?
Yes.
Okay. This is the Park Place area. The green stripe through there is Holcomb Boulevard. All the indicated areas in red are either recently completed, currently approved, or very soon to be applied for property development. Now you can just imagine in your mind the number of vehicle traffic that's going to be all funneled onto Holcomb Boulevard. And that's all going to end up at those 2 circled areas at the bottom of Holcomb Boulevard, which are referenced in these traffic reports. The intersection of Highway 213 and Redland Road, and the intersection of Holcomb Boulevard, Redland Road, and Abernathy Road will be adversely affected and won't be up to standards. And so, as I mentioned the last time, this is just one of these red indicated areas that are going to be pushing traffic into Holcomb Boulevard and also adding school children to the schools. Now, in tonight's testimony, a couple of things I'd like to refer to is, well, the tree cutting, you've already, I won't say anything about that. Keep my mouth shut on that one. I'd like to know if the school district says there's no problem with enrollment, how can they say that based on the figures that I gave you at the last meeting? How can they say that? Unless they've got some plans that we don't know about. And if they do, I think they should start letting us know about them. I heard the word, was it something about taxing us a bond, maybe in the future? I think I heard that word. The statement was made that those areas that are wet now won't be wet after development. Well, all you have to do is just look at that recent Ames Street development between Ames Street and Holcomb Elementary School, and there's standing water all over the place. Crawl spaces were full to the brim, just completely full of water. And they probably said the same thing about that after the development is completed, there won't be any standing water. Well, there is. And that's all I have for this evening, except that I hope you, if you don't downright deny the application, please continue it. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, we have Brian Richards and Mike Zolko.
My name is Ryan Richards. My wife and I live near Holcomb School, and our grandson attends second grade there. I grew up in Oregon City, earned my Eagle Scout badge at Holcomb Elementary, so growth in the community is something I personally witnessed over the years. Development is something that happens and occurs in growing towns and cities like ours. As a union electrician, I've earned my income from construction, so I'm also personally invested in growth in the construction process. I understand development is something that will happen, and I urge the city to proceed wisely. Consider future generations of Oregon City residents. There's no reason a developer should not share the burden of the numerous improvements. Streets, sewer, water are just some of the considerations to the livability of a strong city. The city charges system development fees, and these fees and additional requirements required of the developer during the planning process and permitting process must be used to improve the impacts due to that development. Taxpayers and residents in the area should not be burdened with the impacts from others who gain financially. Please consider the taxpayers and residents, many of which live in the area for years when considering this development. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go.
Oh,
sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
My name is Mike Zolko. First of all, I'll just come right out and say I'm against it. So I hear the comments supporting that. The proposed annexation does not adequately address Oregon City Comprehensive Plan and municipal code requirements. First of all, I have something I didn't make 6 copies, but staff has it. It is folly to approve the proposal on the basis that no development is occurring as a result of this annexation zone change, and numerous statements in the application refer to future development with this proposal. We should be provided a concrete development proposal and then decide whether annexation is a good idea. Not all annexations and developments are bad, just those that adversely affect our livability as this one does. Some of the failures and deficiencies in the proposed plan and code requirements are not adequately addressed. Title 14.04.050 annexation procedures. This title requires a narrative statement explaining the conditions surrounding the proposal and addressing the factors contained in the ordinance codified in this chapter, including a requirement exists to address the availability, capacity, and status of existing water, sewage, drainage, transportation, park, and school facilities. The applicant says that Holcomb School satisfies park requirements and would provide for recreational amenities. I don't know if you've ever been to Holcomb School. Well, you've been to Holcomb School. This is really a highly dubious statement. First of all, the school is fenced. There's a fenced area with a locked gate during non-school hours, and use during school hours is not feasible due to student safety concerns. How do you make a park out of that? The statement of increased demand for such facilities to be generated by the proposed development, if any at this time, that requirement is not addressed. C in this title section, the statement of additional facilities, if any, required to meet the increased demand of proposed phasing of such facilities is not addressed. There may be some very glossy statements, but nothing really serious. The statement of overall development concept and methods by which the physical and related social environment of the site, surrounding area, and community will be enhanced, that issue is not addressed in any meaningful way with any supporting factual information upon which we can make any reasonable comments. Now, with regard to Title 14.04.060 annexation factors, the applicant addresses the adequacy of access to the site with the comment that the site has direct access onto Holcomb Boulevard and Arterial Street. The street would serve as primary access for future development of the property. A secondary access to the site is available via Umber B Lane, but would possibly be restricted to emergency vehicle access only, as it is only a one-half street connection. The future extension of Ames Street would be provided for with the provision of a street hub, but would be dependent upon future expansion of the UGB for completion. This statement states that we will possibly be able to have access via Ames, and that emergency vehicle access alone on Umber is adequate. How, in heaven's name, does that satisfy any adequacy requirements, especially with Lower Holcomb already being a traffic mess, as has been stated before? The transportation-related issues identified in the TIA and TPR need to be addressed and developed prior to annexing an area which is already overcrowded roads. And I might add the January 25th, 24th, 25th.
You've got your red light flashing. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
Okay. Well, I got a lot more here, but just one real quick thing.
Sure.
The annexation does create an island. Whether you look around that whole area, they talk about a 20-foot strip as being the only continuing access to the county. A 20-foot strip that is useless is considered not creating an island. You're creating an island. That fact alone would require a vote, an annexation vote, because you're not meeting comprehensive plan requirements. Okay. There's more to it, but you can read it.
You hang on just a second. Pete, I think you mislabeled this. This is from Mike, and you have down here that it's Brian.
Sorry.
Brian Richards.
Yeah.
So we'll pass it back.
And we'll get copies of that. That's,
Yeah.
that's what you were reading, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll all get copies
Yeah.
of that, so we'll see everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, I go for the continuance as well.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, continuance will
comment.
happen.
Happen,
It's been
yes.
required and it's legally required
Required.
after that. so.
All right. So next we have Mr. Joe Novick and Mr. Larry Drake.
Good evening. My name is Joe Novak. I live on Holcomb Boulevard between Swan and Hunter. I did a little study, just in a very conservative one at that, all right, taking into account the amount of homes that are going to be built in this annexation, and without considering driveways, patios, streets, we're going to lose approximately, or probably more than 200,000 square feet of surface. All right, that's an awful lot of surface that would normally take care of some of this storm water that we're having. And incidentally, hearing on their method of taking care of this storm water by running it north to the Clackamas River, now is that going to flow over South Clackamas River Drive, or is it going to go underneath it? How is it going to reach the river? And that seems like a pretty prone area also for mudslides, caves, and cave-ins, and so forth. Now, if we take into account the airstrip that is right above that, and some of the homes that Bob had mentioned, and a few of the little farms that I have within, say, 4 square blocks of my home, we're going to lose a total of over 400,000 square feet of surface. Now, I don't see how we can possibly control this kind of rainwater here with the way things are. As I mentioned at the last meeting, I've been in my home for 2 years now. And this is not a fluke rain. The year before last, we had as much rain or more. And I've been pumping water out of my house. At least now I'm able to pump it out of there where it's not damaging my structure anymore. What is going to happen to these 100 and some houses at a rain like this where no provisions are put in for any kind of foundation drains or so forth? I mean, are we going to make Terra Firma the richest company in the world for taking care of our crawl spaces in this town alone? It cost me $14,000 to do my crawl space. I've added over 30 tons of rock, and I've got 2 sump pumps that are running pretty much constantly in these last couple of weeks here. I didn't expect any of that when I bought this home 2 years ago, but I'm dealing with it. And the traffic on Holcomb Boulevard, I mean, that's just a no-brainer. Come on, a little common sense. You know can't handle that. You can't widen that road. You can't do anything with it as it is. And plus there's mudslides down on the end of Holcomb Boulevard, which closed it down 2 years ago. So nothing's been done about that in the meantime. That's got a temporary barrier and plastic, laid up against it to keep for further mudslides on that turn. And everybody else has already addressed, pretty much the issues, on the traffic and everything else. I mean, a bridge alone there, if it were even possible to widen Holcomb Boulevard, what would be the cost of a 4-lane bridge up there? It'd be astronomical. So that's all I have to say, except, I don't see how we can afford the pollution, the traffic, the water problems, the problems with the schools, and who even knows, 40 mile an hour down Holcomb Boulevard, it's just a matter of time before a kid gets killed on that road. There's no stop lines, there's nothing to take care of the pedestrians. Thanks.
Okay.
My name's Larry Drake. I'm new to the neighborhood as of May of this last year. One of the things in that my wife and I encountered within the first 2 months was the water. We built a French drain in that, and just in order to get the water out of our area. Since then, we've had houses going around us, a brand new house that has water in it so much where they have to have a sump pump already. Nobody knew about these issues when they moved in. Nobody knew about these issues when they get a new house. What's going to be happening to this water? It's not, as Joe says, it's not a fluke. This water has been around evidently for a long time. So mine's just real short here. But again, what I'm concerned about is the water that we continue to have around and continue to see. Thank you.
Thanks.
Questions, gentlemen? Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
I don't know, it just seems like everybody's complaining about all these indoor swimming pools that they're giving for free. And now you know where the water detention's going to be, so we've answered all those questions. That's sarcasm, I understand.
Okay, Chris and Bryce Borish. I appreciate the fact that this time you do know him. Last time you said you didn't know who he was.
We can speak together tonight.
Thank you so much.
My name is Bryce Borish. I live in Oregon City, and I live in Barlow Crest. Wow. How long do we have?
Green light.
Green light. Okay. I'm disappointed that I don't get as much time as our gentleman with the suits behind us, but that's okay. Because they brought up, I had a couple items, but now I got a whole bunch. First of all, I wanted to just, and I can't speak as eloquently as they do, but hopefully you'll get my point. I wanted to say something about the notification of this whole process, because I drive up and down Barlow or Holcomb every day, and there's no notification of these meetings at all. The signs that were put up originally are all torn up, and there's 3 locations where I've seen signs, and none of them are updated, so nobody knows about these meetings. And Barlow Crest has about 88 homes. I think about maybe 8 homes were notified within the 300 feet of the property annexation. Oak Tree Terrace has no homes near the area, but they have 40 or 50 homes in that development.
Sorry to interrupt. We need to change the
Oh,
disc.
okay.
Yeah,
Hang on
but
just a
we'll
second.
let you continue. We just have to change our recording. So,
Oh, this is
5 minutes? Okay. All right.
This is the standing up stretch break coming up.
Okay.
Good. Continue. Sorry.
Okay, also Trailview, the development there has about 10 homes that were notified out of 88. So there's like 200 homes there, and you have 18 people that were notified. Seems like that's maybe not even 20% of the people. So this is just a handful of the people that know about this. And I think that we're missing the boat on how many people would actually be at these meetings if there was better notification. Another question that I had on the traffic impact analysis, is that a analysis that's done in an office, or is there an actual physical count of cars? Does anybody know that go down the road?
Should be actual. They should have put a rubber hose down and cars go over it.
Okay, well, I understand that this analysis was done in January of this year. That happened to be the time when we had ice days, quite a few ice days, and also that is very steep street there, and a lot of people were advised to stay home. So I don't know if that's accurate information. Also, I would prefer to use Bob LaSalle's figures on the schools, because I am a school bus driver for Oregon City School District. That area right there, I pick up 30 children, 30 students that we transport to Ogden, and another 120 homes in there. I can't even get them on my bus, so you'd have to. The school issue was not even really addressed here because it's overcrowded. I guess I don't have any more time. I'd like to say more about the 100-year flood, because the last one was in 1996.
I was doing
Do
sandbags.
we need to stop right now, Pete?
Yes.
Okay, so give us a minute. All right, I'm going to stand up and stretch. I don't know about you guys, but everybody, maybe stand up, take a break a minute, because it would make us feel better. The red one comes on.
Keep going. Okay.
Renee, ready?
Yep.
Okay, he says we're ready. All right, Chris, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm Chris Borsch, and I live in the Barlow Crest neighborhood also. In fact, our house is right on the corner where they're supposed to put the emergency entrance into an annexation applicant, not a development, but we seem to be doing a lot of talking about development tonight. So my main concern is the cart before the horse, too. And I agree with all the testimony that's happened tonight. There's a lot of discussion about putting houses in before this is even annexed in the city. So I want to reference a little bit about what my husband talked about. I've given Pete a petition that's been passed around our neighborhood to the unfortunate people that didn't get notification of this annexation. The two notifications of this land use change that were put on Holcomb, you couldn't even get to because there was a big creek that was put on a post and you couldn't even read it. So the signage on this was done very poorly. There's a lot of people that have no idea what's being happened or talked about in this room tonight, and I think that that's a disservice to the city of Morgan, the people of Morgan City, and the taxpayers of all these adjacent developments that are going to be affected by this. This also has to do with all the houses that are down on the beginning of Holcomb. Everybody that any traffic that needs to come up to this annexation is going to have to go from the bottom of Holcomb to the top of Holcomb. And I know it's 1.7 miles from the bottom of Holcomb till you get to the entrance to Barlow Crest. So you can just kind of figure out how much land that is in between there. I appreciate you letting us talk again tonight. I do mirror that. I believe that this hearing needs to continue on because there was so much documentation that was presented to the commission tonight that hasn't even been, we've not even had a chance to see it. And I think that we have the right to see it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. Did she use up all of her time?
Nope,
'Cause-
I
didn't.
left some for him.
She didn't.
go,
Can I use some?
Oh, Abs, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. I didn't even get to a few things.
Okay, go right ahead.
It just seems pretty.
Give him a few more minutes there,
Oh.
Laura.
Yeah, there was 39 seconds. 1 second.
All right.
Okay.
We can give him. We can give him a minute.
Somebody said this property has been in the Sears family for 100 years. It seems awful coincidental that they decided when the annex hearings are taking place to chop down more trees. 100 years, no trees been down. Now they're down. It seems kind of funny to me. What's that?
And more marked to go down.
Yeah, and yes, there are more trees marked to go down. They may all go down. I don't know.
There's nothing we can do.
So we retired and bought this house in Barlow Crest, and we kind of expected a neighborhood where there would be maybe older people and be nice and quiet and everything. Well, it didn't turn out that way. A lot of these houses were first-time buyers with 2 or 3 kids. And I can imagine that these new houses, even though they're brand new houses, they're going to be families with 2 or 3 or 4 kids or whatever. So it just seems like some of their projections are a little bit off on school attendance and stuff like that. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't see any older people in here. I see some people with a whole lot of wisdom in here. No old people. All right. Kim Crum and Susan Zolko.
Hi there, my name's Kim Crum. I live in Barlow Crest, and I'm actually on the picture right there. I am far enough away, though, that I did not get the notice. I did notice the blue placards going up on the telephone poles, but they truly are across a ditch, and unless you're a youngster, you can't jump across that ditch and read the signage that says what's going on.
Did you say that they were on a telephone pole?
One of them is on a pole, yeah.
Okay.
Across a ditch.
A utility pole?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that's awkward. And I'm concerned, too, that the people who live at the bottom of Holcomb, if you don't drive up Holcomb, you won't see those blue signs, but they will be directly impacted by all the traffic from this development that has to go right past their house. So noise pollution is a factor for a whole bunch of people that have no idea that we're going to really impact their lives with extra traffic. Congestion at the bottom of the hill to get out is already bad. In the traffic analysis, it was done in January. I never remember seeing going over the rubber strips on the road. So I don't know how they counted cars without having some sort of device there. So when was it done? How long was the traffic study done? And how was it done if there wasn't the little rubber strips that you got to go across to count the cars? The schools, if you look at the picture of the school, it's right under the picture where it says slope area. There are little square buildings on the outside of the main school. Those are portables. And they've been there for a long time.
You want to switch to a...
They're going to have to add more portables or do something different. My concern is they're going to go, oh, we've got all these extra kids. The school is too small. Hey, everybody who lives here, we need more money from you so we can build a bigger school. People who live here should not have to foot the bill for future development. If they needed a new school, the money these developers are paying should be going into a school fund somewhere for future schools. They should not come back to people who live here and go, you guys, we need more money from you for more schools. Quality of life. Goals 3 and 4 on the wall. Enhance the livability of the community. This development won't do that for me. It's going to increase my traffic, increase my noise, and contribute to school overcrowding. So that was goal number 3. Goal number 4, I appreciate being able to come here and say, I don't agree with this development. But how much impact do the neighbors who are going to be here, how much impact do we actually have? We can't vote anymore. So what is the value of me saying, I don't think this is right, and here's why? And I have a couple more things.
You're in
I'm
yellow.
getting close.
Yep, you're in yellow.
Wes Rogers, he testified that there's capacity. Why hasn't the school district said, this is our plan for this school? We know these kids are coming. This is what we're going to do about it. I want to know what their plan is. I don't want to have to foot the bill for building a new school. And I'm out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I gave Pete a copy of this, so you'll get it later, but I believe the annexation should be delayed until the issues that have been raised by the community, especially on the traffic issues, and finding a solution for the traffic with ODOT before the annexation gets approved. I've lived east of the property for 37 years, so I do know what's been going on there for quite a while with the different developments. I did want to clarify that in the staff report, the property was described as a partially wooded site on the eastern boundary, and that was in the former picture when it was all wooded in there. A lot of that was Christmas trees, well, at least the guys that planted them about 30 years ago or more, 35, and asked me for water, said they were planting Christmas trees. They were never harvested. Those were harvested a couple of years ago. With all the large trees that are in this picture, oak and fir trees all along the border and by the Holcomb area were still left. Those 2 weeks ago today started being cut down. The ones behind, the 6 behind my house that have been cut down that border my property are from 24 to 48 inches in diameter. There are still 2 more left that haven't been cut down. There's a group of them right there at the 25. The slope area, the steep slope area, has a whole group of trees that are also marked to be cut down. There's quite a few nice-looking oak trees, big white oaks, that I hope they will be leaving. One is right about under the Barlow Road corridor. I don't know exactly if it's exactly on it or just next to it, but they're at the back, right on the border, so they aren't in something where a house would need to go. So pertaining to the trees, my question, in the code, it says under annexation procedures that the application will include a site plan that includes natural features, which includes isolated, preservable trees, and trees with trunks over 6 inches in diameter. None of those, there was nothing like that in any of the materials that I saw, so nothing was even indicated. It sounds like the city's asking for that, but they really don't have anything they can do with it when it comes, but I would like to point out that it was not included in the application. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the traffic issues. Besides the intersection issues, the traffic at the entrance to Holcomb School, I think it's called Holcomb Grade Road now, or Holcomb Elementary Road, because that development that was allowed to go in and attach its streets to Holcomb Elementary Road was not made so that the road would go straight into Holcomb and be able to see up and down the road. I think there's going to be a lot of issues with traffic incidents as cars come around the curve and wait to turn left to go into Holcomb Road, and the people coming up behind them don't know that they're stopped there. The other place is down at the bottom when you get the sharp curve at the bottom of the hill coming down the road, especially in the morning. You don't know how far the cars are backed up from the light, and that has been an issue, and especially in bad weather. It's not a good place. The 213 at 5 o'clock at night, it's taken us, after we turn off of Holcomb Boulevard, it's taken 3 lights to get onto Highway 213 North, waiting in those 2 lanes. So I think it's already a failure, not for 2035, but for now. Parks and trails, same comment. People said that the Holcomb Elementary isn't good for a park, and no one's going to walk down there because it's too busy. I was going to give history on water issues, but you can ask me later if you want to know, because we've had drainage. I worked on a wetlands area at Holcomb Elementary, and it's been stormwater issues. I mean, there's like underground springs that
Would
feed
you
everything.
be interested in hearing that information?
If she's got it ready, I'd rather not have her have to come back just to.
Bob?
No.
Okay, go ahead then.
Okay.
They said okay.
We put a habitat behind Holcomb School when my kids were there 30 years ago, and because there was so much runoff behind the school and it was so wet, so we put a pond in, but we had someone digging holes for some of the trees, and they dug them deeper than they needed, but the water was running out of holes in the side of the clay soil just as spigots, like springs under the ground. So I know, it's in that soil up there. And then when Barlow Crest was put in, those of us that were living below, ever since Barlow Crest went in, we have had water issues in our yards that we never had before. And they have a stormwater detention plan and pond and stuff, and it's still, summertime even then, our front lawn, which we aren't sloped there, but it's wet like it never was in the past. So it's not just these wet months. There definitely are some stormwater issues, and you need to make sure there really is the capacity to take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I may, for just a moment.
Yes.
Just real briefly for the audience, there was a question raised: when did they do the traffic count? In the report that was submitted a week in advance, they did the traffic counts on Tuesday and Wednesday, January 24th and 25th. So you can actually see where they counted and what the numbers were. It's on the website already, but it is there. So people were curious. It wasn't during one of the snowy days. So
we've got a few more people. I was going to ask you something, Laura. Now it's completely gone out of my mind. Just before I forget about it. Since it's it is apparent that we will be continuing this. I guess part of what I'm concerned about is that the signs were put up and then they weren't they weren't checked again, and then they went down, and then nobody bothered to go repost them or anything. Is there any way we can have the site reposted?
So the applicant can respond to the signs. There's an affidavit that's signed.
Well, sure. I know they put them up, but don't put them up on telephone poles because that's against city code. But yeah, they it would be good if we could just somehow get across to applicants. They need to go back and check because they do go down, and not everybody notices them. Of course, I have radar. I see them, and there's a sign, but not everybody goes driving by and sees them.
Yeah, it's in that signed affidavit.
Yeah.
And can we lose the cardboard and use plastic? Because the cardboard in this time of the year and this weather, they only last about 5 minutes out there.
Well, I used to wrap them.
Let's save that for another.
Yes,
that's fine.
I used to wrap them.
I'm sorry, but
I used to take a dry cleaning bag and put them inside of it, and then I'd give them to the applicant, and then they wouldn't deteriorate. But that was
pathetic.
I know, but that was just me.
Sorry, but
we have
I'll
a million
take a
of
look
them.
into it.
Okay, Kathleen, is it Easley? And then we have also Bruce. Is it Brogan? Bogart. Oh, okay, that was an R. All right, I'm sorry.
Kathleen, could you spell your last name for the record, please?
Bogar.
Or no, Kathleen.
Sorry. EISELE.
E-I.
I thought that was an N. I'm sorry.
That's right.
Thank you.
I am Bob, honest. Thank you. Go right ahead.
No, ladies first.
I have some concerns, a lot of
Just
which
say your
are-
name for the record one more time, even though
Kathleen
you told Pete.
Isley. I live on Winston, and I have a lot of concerns. A lot of them have already been addressed by former people, and concerning the traffic, which is 40 miles per hour downhill, freezing rain, snow, ice. There's a school there, multiple bus stops going up and down the hill, just getting the kids to and from school. There's a fire department that's right there off of Holcomb. All of that is obvious. One of the questions I have is for Pete Walter. You mentioned that the applicant or the applicants were making a request for
So you
this
have to actually
annexation.
ask us, and then you have to actually
Okay.
ask us, and we'll ask him.
Well, he made mention that in the applicants for annexation that they requested a zone change. Am I incorrect?
You're
or
correct.
not?
Yes.
And what zone change is this?
It's from FU 10, which is Future Urban 10-acre minimum, which is a zone within the urban growth boundary, to single-family residential R10.
R10. Okay.
10,000 square foot lot.
One of the concerns I also have is the soil degrading around the perimeters of my property. I have at the very corner of it, I don't know if it's 10 feet or 10 degrees, directly downhill. I had 13 trees cut down behind my property, and that's on his property, not mine. But I'm worried about the soil erosion. One of the concerns I have is with this annexation, with the intent of developing, we're talking about sewer lines going in, which have to, be up to code and everything. But generally speaking, it's always preferable that the sewer lines are gravity fed. With the gradation of this property and the water problem that's already there, I'm wondering if pump stations are going to need to be installed, and who foots the bill for the 24-hour pump stations. Now, you factor into that the water saturation and pooling. They will fail at time to time and will have to be addressed. So I just don't see how Holcomb is going to bear the weight of all this traffic. And I agree, I haven't even seen yet myself a sign on Holcomb that I've been driving up and down 4 times a day. I never saw the traffic study. So if it was on a day where, okay, it might have been 40 degrees and sunny, was it under snow and ice and everybody stayed home? I was one of those few that actually showed up to work, but many people at my work didn't show up at all. So I know people stayed home. So I'm kind of curious as how the study was done and with what devices. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
My name is Bruce Bogar, and I'm actually new to Oregon City. I'm having a home built on Pasture Way, which is right behind Holcomb School. And the water issue, my home has been underwater, the foundation, since they started the home. I was just there before I came here. The crawl space is full of water. The outside around the foundation, the water is standing where they're having to put boards down to even get in there to put the siding up. So the water issue is really bad, and my home is not the only one that faces Holcomb that has the water issue. The Holcomb grade school or middle school, whatever that is, they have a drainage pipe from their parking lot that comes underneath their parking lot that drains into the homes from their water runoff. So they obviously have a water problem there, and we're kind of suffering that as well.
Where did you say that water's going?
It's going into my backyard. So
from the school?
From the school. There's a big water pipe that sticks out of the dirt right into our backyard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely an issue. I'm fighting with Icon Construction Company right now to try and get a resolution. But I'm new to these meetings. I didn't even know about it. A resident stopped by and told me about it, and I decided to show up. The school issue that the gentleman behind we're talking about, the home right across the street from where my home is, a family just moved in there with 5 children. A home just a couple of doors down, 3 children. So we don't have none. We moved into this community thinking it was gonna, be nice, quiet. Nothing against kids. Nothing against kids. But anyway, so there's a lot of new kids in the subdivision, and ours is just one, of many to come, from the sounds of it. And I have 1:15 seconds if you'd like to use it. I'm done.
I just hope that you all review the material that was presented to you tonight and take that time to read it thoroughly and before making any decisions. This boggles my mind. I just don't see how 40 miles per hour downhill on a 2-lane highway can support all of this. It doesn't make sense. And I would like to know how this study was done as far as this traffic study, more specifically.
Yeah, it's all on the website, so.
But the traffic engineer's behind you, and I'm sure we will be calling him up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I do have to give you guys kudos. I'm from the city of Happy Valley, and their community there went to have the speakings like we're doing today. You guys are much better, much better.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
We try hard.
You guys are awesome.
Okay, you heard that. We are awesome.
We should just stop now
Let's
and
stop.
adjourn for the evening.
Yes. Okay, let's go out on a high note. All right, I'm going to call Lynn Anderson, but if there is anybody else that just decided at the last minute they'd like to speak, please come on up, and you can fill out the little slip later. Don't be shy. We don't bite. We just heard we were awesome, so, you know.
Hi, Lynn Anderson, Oregon
Hi, Lynn.
City. I do not live in Park Place, and I'm not opposed to the annexations or to smart, well-planned development. What I am extremely opposed to, though, is the trampling of citizens' rights on this House Bill 1573. I think if you look into it, you'll find that it was passed on a lot of lobbying by developers and real estate agents under the guise of a housing shortage. Additionally, I wanted to clarify, Ms. Turway pointed out to you that almost was setting a precedence. The City Commission has already passed one annexation without voter approval. But I want to clarify for you, and I'm sure you know, that one annexation was less than a half-acre piece of property. And that's like comparing a small mom-and-pop business and the ramifications of building a Walmart. So comparing those two and saying it's in kind of a precedence, I would disagree with. I think as far as precedents, I would say that, the city charter says that we get to vote on annexations. And I know that this House Bill 1573 has come in after the fact, but the citizens of Oregon City also voted to legalize marijuana, and that is also in opposition to federal law. So we pick and choose what we're going to listen to, but I think we should be listening to the people of Oregon City, and it's in our charter. Additionally, our city commission swore an oath to uphold the Oregon City charter. And so if you do end up putting this forward to the city commission, I would hope that you would strongly recommend that they consider putting this on the ballot and not further trampling on the rights of the people to vote on annexations in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a late one. This is my first time coming to one of these meetings. My name is Janice Brown Slagle. I live in Barlow Crest. When I moved here 17 years ago from Portland, I lived on 75th, and as you, I'm sure, know, the traffic on 82nd Avenue is awful, and it's noisy all the time. So one of the reasons that I moved here was going back to the livability. I wanted to live someplace where I could feel safe, where it would be peaceful and there wouldn't be traffic roaring down the road at all hours. And I really feel like with the current annexations that are already in progress, with the development that is already going to be underway prior to this consideration, I feel like I'm almost back to living on 75th Avenue. Because Holcomb, in the time that I have lived here, has gone from being fairly quiet to being a very busy boulevard. And that and my predecessor's comments regarding the traffic at the corner or at the intersection of Holcomb and Abernathy and Redland, and then again at Highway 213 and Redland. If you have to wait 3 light changes to get through a light, that is a failure in traffic. And I think we all know that. I'm just reiterating what other folks have already said. But the other piece, though, is that I don't know that we've really stressed enough is a lot of us live here because there's a quality of life in Oregon City that we sought We came here for a reason, and all of these changes are making our area less livable because we're not planning for them correctly. We don't plan our schools. We don't plan our traffic. It's just the developer comes in, does his thing, makes his millions, and he's done. We live with the consequences. And I think before we say, yes, we would want to do something like this, we really need to plan how we would annex more property, how we would handle all of the side effects of creating new housing. And I just would like for you to consider that.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Any questions?
No.
Anybody else? I want to give everybody an more than ample opportunity before we call the applicants back up. And I guess Mike's coming up this time, and Rick, are you coming back up? And so anybody else like to testify? Okay, so we'll call the applicants back up. Come on up, Mike.
Are you talking to another Mike or?
Mike Ward. He's got a lot of transportation questions, I guess. Seems like the transportation was a lot of the questions.
So Chairman Griffith, before we start a rebuttal, we understand that the hearing can the record either left open or the hearing be continued. To the extent the commission has a preference, if you want to continue it to your next meeting, which I think would be March 13th, we'll extend the 120-day clock for the period of that continuance, if that's what you elect to do. So let me take 30 seconds and then we will let Mike talk. So
It's only 30 this time.
Are you timing me?
Well, you said the 30.
He is going to time you.
Good, please do. We appreciate what we've heard tonight. We think the record answers all of these questions, and there are two things I'll say, and then we'll use the open record period to respond to most of this. The city has done a lot of planning. It is not a case where this is done without standards. You have a transportation system plan, you have a parks plan, the school district does planning. That's what you heard Mr. Givens talk about. So this is not the case of an application made without any standards or without any planning. And secondly, with respect to notice, just because it came up a number of times, I took a look at your code during the testimony. The city provided notice to everyone, every property owner within 300 feet of the boundary of the property. That's what's required. And the applicant posted notice within 10 feet of the street. That's what's required. So I don't think there's not a prejudice to a substantial right because of a failure of notice. That's the standard. So that's all I want to say tonight. We'll provide some additional testimony, Chair McGriff, in written form. Mike, why don't you talk about traffic?
Thank you. Mike Ard with Lancaster Engineering, and I prepared the traffic impact study that was done for this development. I want to start out by saying that I actually attended Holcomb Elementary from 1980 to 1984, from 3rd through 6th grade. So I particularly appreciate Commissioner Espy, the fact that your wife works there. I have very fond memories of that school.
They didn't have any trailers there at that time, though, did they?
No, I don't think they did. I want to talk a little bit about context to start with, because I think there is a sense from the community that we're trying to do something new here, that this zone change is something that's being proposed by new development. And what I see is that this zone change and annexation is done as part of what the city intended to do, and they identified this property in the comprehensive plan as being property that would be annexed into the city in the future, and also identified what zoning would be applied to that property in the future when it did come in. It's also not the only piece of property that's considered for annexation in this area. There are other properties, as was pointed out in the map that you guys got previously, that show other annexation and development areas. And I want you to understand that the traffic study that we did actually took into account all of those developments, that we weren't just looking at the impact solely of this, but that we were looking at the long-range impacts of what is the transportation system and how can we make it adequate. So with that said, the transportation system plan that's prepared by the city is generally the tool for implementing decisions about transportation policies and procedures and improvements into the future, usually looking 20 years out into the future. In this particular case, the city has a transportation system plan that already addresses this level of development, but what it didn't include is specific analysis for 3 key intersections. And those intersections are the ones that we studied in the report. So that included the intersection of Holcomb at Redland, of Redland at 213, and actually you guys did include in your transportation system plan the intersection of Highway 213 at Beaver Creek. You just didn't go to the level of deciding on an ultimate fix for that intersection, so we included that as well in our analysis. We did get some questions that I heard during the testimony about how and when we studied the intersections. We did, as Commissioner Mabee pointed out, collect that data on a particular day in January when there was not snow and ice on the road. We typically have to defer collection of count data when conditions are abnormal, so we do look for normal conditions to occur. There was also a question about rubber strips on the road, and those are typically used to count traffic volumes on a street segment, but they're not used for counting turning movements at intersections. They don't tell you who's turning which direction and when. And so what we actually use is cameras at those intersections to count. The cameras are up usually for about a 24-hour period, and they collect data typically from 7 to 9 a.m. and from 4 to 6 p.m. because the peak hours of traffic for the morning peak and for the evening peak occur during those 2-hour windows. So that is what we studied. We also looked, because it's a requirement under Oregon law, at the reasonable worst case development scenario for the property. And based on the acreage of the property and the minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet, in conjunction with an assumed percentage of property that would be lost to infrastructure, the roads and the various parcels that need to be dedicated, which we assumed as 20% of the land area, we came up with a maximum of 124 lots that could be developed. And I appreciated Councilor McGriff's observation that that is a high estimate. It absolutely is a high estimate and was intended to be so. A much more realistic average for a site that does not have encumbrances like wetlands and the Barlow Road and the steep slopes and that sort of things is about 70%, which would put you at about 106 homes. We did err on the high side. It's likely to be 106 or fewer given the constraints of this site. But again, because Oregon law requires us to look at the reasonable worst case development scenario, and because we don't want to understate the potential impacts of development within an area, we did assume 124 lots. As far as the 3 intersections and the results of the analysis, for the intersection of 213 at Beaver Creek, our answer was relatively simple. We found that we simply had no impact on that intersection. We have 5 site trips that will go through that intersection out of 6,800 roughly peak hour trips that are running through the intersection under existing conditions. So we add less than 0.1% to the existing traffic volume at that intersection. We had no operational impact on the intersection during the morning or evening peak hour, either in terms of the average delay in seconds or in terms of the volume to capacity ratio. And we also fell within an exemption under ODOT. Their Oregon Highway Plan calls out what constitutes a small increase in traffic that's defined as not requiring mitigation, and we fell well below that threshold at that intersection. With that said, that leaves 2 more problematic intersections. First of all, the intersection of Highway 213 at Redland Road, which we heard experiences some cycle failures. Some people were indicating that they wait up to 3 cycles to get through that during the PM peak hour. Our analysis showed that that intersection is right now operating at 101% of capacity. Now that's actually physically impossible. You can't operate at more than 100% of capacity, but somehow we're squeezing an extra 1% through that intersection. So it is extremely congested under existing conditions. And we do expect that that congestion is going to get worse in the future, that it's going to require some mitigation. Under 2035 background conditions, we estimated that that intersection would operate with volumes 23% over capacity rather than 1% over capacity. And that's presuming that this annexation did not go forward. So that's a problem that we're anticipating in the city. For the intersection of Redland at Holcomb, that intersection is operating within capacity under existing conditions, but by 2035 that also would be expected to operate at 7% over capacity without this annexation. So the question at that point there is twofold. First of all, we want to make sure that when we propose a new development or an annexation, that we first do no harm, that we make sure that anything that we propose is going to be offset by mitigation that's appropriate and sufficient to make sure that we restore things to at least make them no worse than they would be if we didn't approve the annexation. In the case of the intersection of Highway 213 at Redland Road, we identified a fix there that would improve the capacity by about 2%, and we add about 1% to the intersection, so it would a little bit more than offset the impacts of the development, but it would still be over capacity. So it isn't a comprehensive fix. It needs something that's done on a broader view, which is really the reason that we're looking at a condition of approval that says we need to study this and we need to contribute toward it in the future, rather than simply saying we're going to do this small fix that offsets our impacts, and we'll do that today. So a grander fix, I think, is going to be a smarter way to go about this. The applicant is willing to wait for that study to be done, and that is the reason that we have that condition of approval rather than a recommendation for implementation of an improvement in association with the development. For the intersection of Redland Road at Holcomb Road, things are a little bit cleaner because it does have a projection again to be over capacity, 7% over capacity without this annexation, 11% over capacity with the annexation. So there's a bit of a meaningful impact there. The mitigation that we proposed there was to add an eastbound right turn lane to the intersection, and with that improvement we project that it would operate at 95% of capacity. So it's not just making it better than it would have been otherwise, it's actually restoring the intersection to be within capacity where it otherwise would not have been. So again, that intersection treatment is one potential treatment that could be made at the intersection. We do want to look at it comprehensively and make sure that the city is happy with the improvements that are proposed out there. But we do have both near-term fixes identified in the traffic study and the express desire to make sure that we leave the transportation system better than we found it.
And that's what condition of approval 14 does, and both ODOT and the city have agreed that that condition addresses the TPR mitigation requirements.
Couple questions for you.
Yes.
First, I noted that your traffic study for the PM peak is 4 to 6, which is the standard. But you have, but you have a school, which is a huge traffic impact, and it's not inside that time frame. So, assuming that you've got camera data for that, it'd be very interesting to see what the change, or if it's just a more extended.
I'll say two things about that. First of all, typically we find that the AM peak hour does overlap with the school peak hour.
Yeah, the AM I have no problem with. It's the PM.
Right. Yeah, so during the afternoon, typically when we're studying a school, we look at count data from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. rather than 4 p.m. to 6 p.m.
Okay.
Because that school peak typically occurs between the 2 and 4 p.m. hours. With that said, typically that analysis is conducted as part of a school project, not as part of a neighborhood project, because we're not creating the traffic conditions associated with the school. But even more to the point, we typically find that there is some level of congestion that occurs around school neighborhoods during the times of the start and end of school. And we typically don't seek to cure that, because that congestion is what makes sure that traffic is moving slowly through the area precisely when there are children present and when there's a hazard that needs to be addressed. So we don't want to make sure that congestion goes away and that people are flowing through at 40 miles an hour, making sure that they can go at the speed limit. Rather, we accept that level of congestion and make sure that we create a safe environment during those times. That is the primary goal.
Right. My concern is that the true peak hour may not be the peak hour that you've shown. It may be shifted more towards when the school is getting out, so that we're getting the proper peak hour numbers for your traffic study. And because what we've got is what you gave us from 4 to 6.
Right.
Anecdotally, we hear that the peak hour, the heaviest flow, is before 4 o'clock when the school is getting out. So
let me be clear here, because we talked about the impact area of this and
Mhm.
the scope of the traffic impact study. The scope of that study were specifically the 3 intersections at 213 at Beaver Creek, 213 at Redland, and Holcomb Abernathy at Redland. So in order for it to be warranted to do an analysis from 2 to 4 p.m. rather than 4 to 6 p.m., what we would have to find is that those intersections are
Mhm.
experiencing their peak volumes at that time of day. And that is extremely unlikely.
Unlikely, but not unproven, because you haven't given us the data to say that this
You're
is,
absolutely right. I
This
have
is
not
the peak hour
provided that
we have
evidence.
found.
I'd be happy to have Mr. Replinger weigh in on whether he believes that that is within the realm of possibility.
That's fine. The other question I have is, do you have your report in front of you?
I do.
Page 35 is a nice little diagram of an intersection. I'm just curious where that intersection is. Since you know the neighborhood, you
Page
should be able to answer.
35. I think your page numbering may be different.
I'm just
from
using
mine.
the.
Can you tell me what's on it?
Can you hold it up, please? Or do you-
Yeah.
You can't, it's on the screen. It says Wednesday, January.
It's the Redland Road, Holcomb Boulevard peak hour summary diagram.
And it is an all traffic data.
It's just a picture of the intersection with the numbers going hither and yon.
Okay, so I'm sorry, which intersection did you say it was?
Redland Road and Holcomb Boulevard.
Redland Road at Holcomb Boulevard, and I am looking for the AM or the PM peak hour here.
AM, 7:20 AM
No,
to
well, it
8:20
doesn't matter. Yeah.
AM.
Okay,
that
so
one.
I'm looking at the AM.
Okay.
Yes.
Is this what? Is that what you're looking at?
Yes.
That kind of diagram. Thank you.
It's exactly that diagram. I'm
Thanks.
just curious where that intersection is, because it shows Redland Road bisecting Holcomb, and it doesn't. You've left Abernathy off of your diagram.
This isn't actually my diagram. This is prepared by our traffic counting subconsultant. You're correct that the west leg of the intersection
Okay.
is Abernathy, but that
That's
is
what I wanted to
Redland
know
that's
is
going through
which
north-south.
leg was Abernathy and which leg was Holcomb.
It's number 2. It's that one.
Yeah, it would be intersection number 2 in the map
On
figures that
figure
are
2,
in
page
the.
8.
Yeah,
Okay, so
They
the
might wanna
west
correct
side,
that.
the west side is Abernathy.
that is correct. Yes.
Okay, you might want to
Correct that.
fix your.
Yeah, I wrote
I,
that on
I
mine
don't
too.
actually
I
have a
said-
way to fix that since it was a
I
third-party
said, where
source.
is that? Because
Right.
I don't know where that is.
I think
So-
what they do is they enter in the 2 cross streets, and they typically don't have the
Yeah,
the
the
multiple
third or
name
fourth
thing
or whatever.
in there.
But I don't know whether you just.
I think we did have it
we
correctly
might
identified
have
in our maps,
clarified
though.
it just now in testimony, but it might be useful to.
Yeah,
just make
it is shown correctly with the labeled street names in the body of our report.
Okay.
But
And
not
it does
on
show
the-
those same turning movement volumes.
Yeah.
Actually, if
Okay.
you look at page 11, figure 3, I'm sorry, that is not the right one. Should be figure 2, page 8. So those exact same turning movement volumes should
Yeah.
show up for
Where it's like
note bubble 2.
the whole big
AM and
crisscross of
PM.
streets with the little bubbles.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a little difficult to tell where the bridges are on those crossings.
Yeah, no, I've studied more than a few of them. I was just curious where the intersection came from, and then, like I said, I am concerned that your peak hour, afternoon peak hour, is shifted because of the impact of the school traffic. So that's what I would like to have addressed, whether it's, you can show that no, and it's not, here's our numbers, or whether, you know.
Yeah, with the record being held open, I'm sure we'll have time to address that as appropriate. That does bring up one other thing, though, that I neglected to mention in my testimony, which is the discussion of Holly Lane, the Holly Lane extension. I just wanted to point out that in figure 3 on page 11, it shows the distribution of site trips, and what we assigned to going down the Holly Lane extension is 0 trips. We did not count on that existing, at least through the time of build out of this. We recognize and noted specifically on page 10, the second paragraph, that is a future planned transportation facility, but we did not rely on it for the purposes of our analysis.
In your diagram of Redland Holcomb only shows 90 cars turning during that two-hour period down Redland towards Holly. So conceivably, those 90 cars would be siphoned out of the intersection.
Right.
But we don't know whether they're going up Anchor Way to the hospital or going to Holly Lane to go up to the high school or Ogden or whatever. So
we would certainly
it's-
expect a reduction in the northbound right turning movement and the westbound left turning movement at that intersection.
But it's still only 90 out of 500 cars at the time, so it's a
Right.
20%-ish impact. Thank you.
That's still an impact.
Yeah, it is.
Bob, Paul, Zach,
Why don't you start with Bob?
questions for Mike? Bob's thinking, so let's pass Bob up for the moment.
Still questioning about the timing. Refinement plan, annexation, zone change. So somewhere in your executive summary and the traffic report, you guys were mentioning the fact that you wanted to annex the property and then have a condition of approval on the annexation.
That's not on the annexation, it's on the zone change.
It's on the zone change. Okay. Okay.
Because it addresses the TPR.
Right. I mean, that is problematic, I guess, for me, but that's a deliberation thing. What would you do then? So you would have you'd have the zone change. Before you did the zone change, you would have, or after the zone change. Tell me what you're going to do.
Well, you have the zone change, you have both the annexation and the zone change before you. The transportation planning rule applies only to the zone change.
Right.
We acknowledge there is a significant effect under OAR 660-120060 sub 1. We proposed a condition of approval, which is an allowed mitigation method under 2E. And we coordinated with the city, ODOT staff, and John Relplinger to come up with a condition of approval that would provide appropriate mitigation. And what condition of approval 14, which is in the staff report at pages 40 and 41, says is, condition of approval for the zone change is we cannot do the land division, which is the development, until these things happen. And we worked very hard with John Mackler at Region 1 and your assistant city attorney to come up with this language. And it essentially requires a number of things to be done by the city, not us, by the city. And then you amend Oregon City Municipal Code 1204, which is your public, I think, Pete, you referred to it as the road standards section. That applies to land divisions. So there has to be a fix that comes out of a refinement plan and your work with ODOT, and then it has to be reflected in an amended land use regulation. Then we can develop the property.
But that work yields unknown outcomes, right?
We're the ones, it yields an outcome that you have to the city and ODOT are going to come up with a plan to address these intersections. And we're saying we're not going to do anything until you've adopted that plan.
So you do just want to annex the property and then
Annexing and zoning. But you have to have mitigation for the significant effect in order to approve the zoning map amendment. And that's what condition of approval 14 does.
Okay.
You say okay, but I think you still have questions.
Yeah, I know. I'm slipping into deliberation.
I've got a question
I won't
finally.
do that. But, yeah, I know.
Go ahead, Zach.
Okay.
Bob, please, go right ahead.
When you say a plan, a traffic plan, you're talking about lines on a map, are you not?
Not necessarily.
Are you talking about funding?
Well,
because therein lies the
yes,
problem.
that's exactly.
We
what
wouldn't be sitting here talking if we had the funding, right?
If the applicant had the money to spend to make numerous improvements that need to be made, not just by the applicant but by others, you're right. We wouldn't be talking about any of this. But in fact, condition of approval requires that the refinement plan, which will address Oregon 213 at Redland Road, include a financially constrained plan. That's funding.
So you're saying the city has to come up with a funding plan, because plan means a lot of things to a lot of different people.
The city has to come up with a plan for how these intersections are going to be fixed. The condition goes on to say that we have to share, for example, at Redland and Holcomb, we have to share in the proportional fix for that. We've acknowledged, whatever that plan is, that we're going to be on the hook for helping contribute to that solution at the land division stage.
So Bob, let me ask, maybe see if I understood exactly what you said. Was that you're saying something to the effect that there may be a plan, but that doesn't mean that the plan's going to get executed to alleviate the problem, because we don't know if the city has any money.
That's right.
To do.
But it's implied. The
Yeah.
word plan implies that there's going to be a solution, which implies there's going to be some construction somewhere along the line,
Well.
which implies that it's going to require funding.
But is that the reality? I don't know if that's the reality.
Well, I mean, we're all sitting here wondering what reality is.
Well, Commissioner Mahoney, the reality, here's the reality. If there's not a plan, and if there's not funding, and if we can't fix it, we can't develop that property. So we have an incentive to see that the city and ODOT work cooperatively to come up with the plan, and then we'll be part of the solution to help implement that plan. That is how you mitigate this. No single applicant is ever going to be responsible for all of the delayed improvements that have gone on out here. What we wanted to do is to try and work cooperatively with ODOT and the city to come up with a condition that addresses our impacts, and that's what we did through condition of approval 14. And you're right, it's going to have a funding element to it, and we're going to have to contribute to that.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Yes, that is what the condition says. We acknowledge that, and we're prepared to abide by that.
So, Mike, Zach, you got a question?
Yes. Mike, is there development planned at this time?
Which
In
Mike?
terms-
They're both Mikes. So you
he was looking at me, I think.
Yeah.
Mike R and Mike A. So you've got to figure out which one.
I'm just going really basic.
Mike Robinson.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, do we have a subdivision
No,
plan?
no. Is there development planned at this time?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hinkin, I'm not sure I understand the question. Do we intend to develop?
No. Is there a planned development at this time? Is it?
There's not a subdivision plan at this time.
Would you mind just walking through real briefly in basic terms the checks and balances that would go into effect, assuming this is approved somewhere down the road?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and you guys know the code as well as I do. If I miss something, please point it out. So all we're seeking approval now are two of the three stages of development: annexation and zone change. I said earlier, the zone change is mandated by your code. We don't have a choice about that because, as you heard earlier, we originally applied for annexation. When we looked at the code and spoke with your city attorney's office, it was clear to us your code requires concurrent zoning because it's got a comp plan designation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we're doing zoning now. We would probably love to do a land development, except we're not allowed to under state law. So if ultimately you recommend approval to the city commission and they approve this, it's going to become part of the city. It's going to have the R10 zone, which, as Pete told you, has the largest lots in the city. That's as far as it goes until all of this other work that Commissioner Mahoney and I were just talking about. When we get to that stage, we have to make a land division application. It requires a number of things. It requires utility plan, a stormwater plan. It requires us to show and install all of the streets. We have to post a bond for the performance of the streets. It's a type 2 process, I think, so there's not initially a public hearing, but everyone who got notice of this application gets notice of the land division application. The director makes the decision. Those folks have an opportunity to request a hearing on that decision. So the checks and balances are, first of all, we can't even start with the land division application with hope of approval until condition of approval 14 is satisfied. If it's satisfied, then we have to do all the other things an applicant normally has to do to have a land division approved. And in the city of Oregon City, they're fairly complex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael A. So while I fundamentally understand how these reports are done, we have a whole room full of people who are not traffic engineers, and their perception and their actual experience is that it is congested and there are problems. So when you sit there and tell them that there's still capacity and things can happen, I'm looking at them and they are not believing you. They are not believing what the...
I'm not sure that I said that, though.
Well, let me just go. So
okay.
Anyway, so part of it is we have the traffic study, and Mr. Rupplinger long knows that I have a problem with the traffic studies because they're all theoretical. They go from the ITE manual, but you have people who live there, who travel these intersections, whether they believe that they can accept more congestion or not, are telling us one thing and you're telling us something completely different. And I'm looking out into the audience and I have people who have got the skeptical look on their faces saying, how can you say what you're saying when they know from actual reality this is what's happening? You know, it's three light changes at the intersection, it's congested here, there are problems here, there are visibility issues from this particular street coming out, all of these things, which I know some of it moves into development. But I'm not getting the feeling and the vibe from those assembled here tonight and those who were assembled here before that they are feeling, regardless of all of the professional credibility and everything that you have, and I know you're a professional engineer, they're not feeling the love from your study, and they're not feeling that it reflects what they experience and what they know. And I'm sure you probably encountered this at many public hearings, but I'm looking at their faces, and they are not happy campers. They are telling you that there is traffic problems, there are congestion problems that are already here, that this apparently does or does not reflect. I'm not making a judgment. And we've been told many times by our city public works director that people are going to have to accept more and more congestion. Well, you know, Oregon City's been doing the death by 1,000 cuts since we began planning. It's like, okay, we're not going to add more traffic, but then there's the next subdivision, and then there's the next development, and there's the next development, and so when does the bubble explode? Because I think in many places in this community, it's already exploded. People are already saying that. You know, somebody's lived there for 17 years, and they've just seen the traffic increase. You know, so I guess I'm not asking you for a treatise on trying to make them feel better, but how do we take the reality of what they're dealing with and what you've got in your numbers? And you said you used cameras?
Yes.
So nobody physically was out there observing kind of what's going on. They were using eye in the sky, and there weren't any little rubber hoses or anything of that sort.
Yeah, it's typically a camera on an extensible pole that's strapped to a pole near the intersection where they can get an adequate view looking sort of downward at the entire intersection. It's the way that most modern traffic counts are done. Occasionally there are instances where it really is a person with a truck and they're sitting out there with a count board and counting it, but particularly for heavy traveled intersections, it becomes more prohibitive to do that.
So, and I guess
to
the thing is you're
collect it with
contracting this
video.
out to a third party?
Yes, in this case it was all traffic data.
Yeah. So I guess, you know, since you've been in that area, did you do any physical observation? Just,
I have done some observations in this area, not particularly associated with this project, but over time I've done a lot of work in this area, and particularly I've watched that intersection at Holcomb, Abernethy, and Redland on more than one occasion, as well as having done some saturation flow studies for the intersection of 213 at Redland, because we're trying to figure out how to make sure that the model reflects reality as accurately as possible. With that said, I'll add a couple things. First of all, that I grew up in a subdivision that was out to the east off of Holcomb Road, so I drove it daily for decades. Yeah. The congestion that occurs right now is definitely more traffic than what occurred when I used to live in the area. I want to say, again, because maybe I didn't make myself clear regarding that intersection of 213 at Redland Road, normally when I get into a situation like this where we're dealing with public comments about congestion, oftentimes there is a huge disconnect between the perception of congestion and the mathematical model of congestion. It's extremely common for that to be in direct conflict, and for what we define as being acceptable to not necessarily be what the lay public would define as acceptable. But the standards of the city are laid out based on the process of analysis per the way that we did it. So looking at delay, looking at volume to capacity ratios, and using the standard highway capacity manual method. With that said, I'm not seeing that conflict here. Because the congestion that's being reported by the local residents, the fact that they're seeing multiple cycle failures, is directly shown right at the study that I'm looking at, where for that intersection of 213 at Redland Road, for the evening peak hour, which was the particular intersection that they said they had the 3 times cycle failure occur at, that's the one that we're at 1% over capacity. We're squeezing more cars through that intersection than what my mathematical model says can fit. So what they're saying fits exactly with what we're seeing in the report here. I don't think there is a big contradiction there. So again, what this comes down to for me is we want to make sure that we leave that intersection no worse than we found it, and that was the goal of our study, both in looking at the mitigation and in crafting the condition of approval. So we appreciate that residents are concerned about traffic, and we want to make sure that we're not contributing to that problem.
Well, I just wanted you to say that in a little bit better layman's terms so that they could.
I'm glad I got the opportunity.
They could understand. It's very difficult when we get these traffic reports, and as you said, they're based on a theoretical mathematical model, and that's not what they're seeing. But just for the record, I apologize, but I looked up on my phone, and on January 24th, the weather report said that it was 46 degrees, it was cloudy, but there wasn't any rain. So that was not a bad day. Now, I don't know what it said for the next day, but, you know, we had crazy weather in January like we're having crazy weather today.
Yeah, and as I was explaining to someone else in the audience previously, we actually had a study that we had to delay by 4 weeks because the snow persisted on the road at high elevations. So it is something that we're cognizant of, and we make sure that we collect our data when it's appropriate.
So Michael R., just one little point of clarification from you. So tonight I have heard in written form 121 proposed lots, and then I heard Michael A. say 124, and I know it's only a difference of 3, but which one is it?
It's both. 124 is the total number of lots, but under the existing zoning, 3 are allowed, so the net increase is 121 lots. That's the change that we're looking at is 121.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Rick, did you have anything you wanted to say?
I think we're going to be doing it right. I believe I heard Mr. Robinson say.
Well, yeah, thank you for your questions. Chairman Griff, if the commission elects to continue the hearing, is it your intention then to just come back and repeat the same process as you've done tonight?
I am only one of
I'm asking if you're going to be following the public hearing procedure at the continued hearing.
Yes. We are going to probably yes, because we've been asked for it, but I will ask my fellow commissioners what they feel about the record, so I don't want to make any predisposed comments about whether it's going to be closed or open or what.
I think we've got too many different bits of new information. We should just leave it generally open.
Yeah, people should have an opportunity to comment on the new evidence that's been given to us.
I agree. I have no problems with that.
All right. They have spoken. Is there anything else that I need to do before I close and we make a motion for continuance?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we all understood that, as I understand what you're discussing, what you're contemplating is closing the hearing for tonight, but continuing it to the next meeting, which is March 13th at 7 p.m., at which point, even during the period, there's going to be open record, people can submit written materials, but it will also be open testimony at the next March 13th and hopefully closed at the end of that one.
Okay. That's what I heard.
Yeah. And the staff report will be ready by March 6th, and the materials from this meeting would be posted on the city's website. Yeah.
Mike, did you want to come up and ask a procedural question? You're not going to be testifying, right? Okay. Why don't you do that before I close it? Okay. It's probably about process and what's, is the chicken coming before the egg, or?
Well, it's more of a process of, for the next hearing, that we be given the opportunity to see any information that the applicants prepare and present. Like they gave you a 12-page or something document today. Well, we need time to look at that as well.
Yeah, that
so
will be available.
Any of that type of information from them should be
Laura,
available.
could you be some reassuring here?
Yes. We will scan the information that was submitted, and as Pete was referring to, we'll post it onto our website. If you go to www.orcity.org, if you go under projects, you can have a map, and it'll link you right into the applications. There's one thing I wanted to mention real quick is, so we have these planning commission hearings, and then we move to city commission hearings. In our notice, we try and guess at when those dates are, and when they don't happen and they get continued, we have this city commission hearing process that's going on. And so there is a city commission hearing. We had requested a continuance for March 15th. That hearing for that request of continuance is Wednesday. But you are in the appropriate place, and we would, your testimony is best directed to the planning commission at this point, since they haven't really made a decision yet. So if we continue the hearing for planning commission to March 13th, you can either submit written comments or come to the hearing on March 13th. The city commission requests for continuance, which we had guessed at March 15th. If we continue planning commission to March 13th, then we're going to have to continue city commission to even later, which would be April 5th. So in summary, if you vote, in which I think that you will, the planning commission hearing would be March 13th. That's a great time to come and speak again or provide written comments. You can send written comments directly to Pete or myself. And then they'll, at some point, the planning commission will close the record. The hearing will be on the record. So you want to make sure to get in your comments to the planning commission before it goes to city commission. And when it goes to city commission, I am guessing it will probably be around April 5th. Or later.
Chairman Griff.
Is it a procedural?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. So I don't think you can limit the evidence or testimony. You may continue the hearing. If you do so, it's a continued hearing. We'll try and put everything in time for Pete to evaluate for a staff report. We're also not waiving our right to final written argument at the conclusion of that hearing.
Yeah, we agree.
Yes, we get that.
Well, it needed to be stated on the record.
That's fine. Thank you so much. We really, really, really appreciate it. Thank you, Mike.
Whatever that meant.
It means they're keeping their legal rights open.
Yes, that's fine. Everybody should. Thank you, Mike.
But
for
the
asking
hearing
question.
on...
Let me close the public hearing.
I just want to just...
Okay, all right. One more
on
thing.
March 13th, it will be just like it was tonight. So if you have evidence, bring it. Bring copies for everybody. And make sure that you're prepared. If you said it tonight, you don't need to say it again on the 13th, though. We heard you.
And that number of copies that would be appropriate would be
6.
7.
7, yeah.
6.
7 copies.
I would recommend 10, 3 for staff and city attorney too.
So yeah, okay,
All right.
10.
All right.
That's a magic number.
I am closing the public hearing and asking for any deliberation of a motion for continuance, or if you have any directions for staff before we make our motion to continue.
I think we should just motion to continue.
Okay, I have a question for staff, though. Pete, I was a little bit concerned by some testimony that mentioned that there were some, again, I know we don't have a tree thing, but trees within the 25% slope area that were proposed and marked proposed to be cut. I'm just feeling a little uncomfortable about that, because if it is a 25% slope, why do we want to be cutting down vegetation that might be helping keep the slope there, or just a thought?
Well, if it was in the city, we would have a regulation that forbade removal of more than a quarter of the canopy within a slope over a certain percentage. It's not in the city, so the city's zoning code overlay does not apply. Any logging or tree removal that is done on that site either has to meet the Forest Practices Act if it's being logged, and they mentioned that it's under timber deferral and other things. So whatever regulations are in place right now, whether they're state or county or some other thing, those would be in place with respect to logging on slopes, water quality, and other things.
Okay, well, to no one in particular, please don't cut down the trees on the 25% slope since you're planning on coming into the city. Motion, please.
He made one. I second it.
Let's have the motion for the record, please.
Go ahead, Zach.
I'll motion to continue PC 17018 AN 16-0004 to, I think we had a date
March
certain
13th?
of March 13th.
I second.
Leaving the record open.
Yes, and leaving the record open.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion and we have a second.
Call
Would
the
you
roll.
do the roll call, or can we just all say aye or go from there?
I can call the roll. Commissioner Mabey?
Aye.
Commissioner Hankton?
Aye.
Commissioner Espy?
Aye.
Commissioner Mahoney?
Aye.
Chair McGinnis?
Aye. Thank you, everybody, tonight. I know it was a long meeting, but we were really appreciative of everyone who was here tonight, applicants, everybody, to be able to speak. We appreciate it, and we take this very, very seriously, and we will get through reading all the stuff you submitted. So, again, we appreciate it. Thank you very, very much. Laura, do we have any communications?
So for the interviews,
For the record, we do need to
Yes.
state why we're adjusting the agenda.
Yes. So we're going to postpone those.
all right, so we'll continue the interviews
Gentlemen,
until
would you
also
prefer to
March
postpone
13th.
those?
Yeah.
Welcome to the fun house. I really would like to do them a different day, to be honest with you.
Let's do them a different day, but let's do them first, like at 6 or something like that. Can we do that?
Are you guys available to start at 6 on March 13th?
Can we wait until this, I'm not even in this conversation here because of this noise.
Yeah, let's wait a second.
What?
He said he can't hear you either.
I'll turn my mic back on and
Yeah, hang on just a quick second.
yeah. Yeah, we're sorry that you guys had to sit here all night.
Oh, well.
Bob, you're here anyway all the time, so.
Well, most of the time.
But
We're still in session, Bob.
Oh, you are? Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have not adjourned the meeting. We are still in session. Well, I guess I was going to ask, is there any chance that we could do it on March the 6th?
like on a different day?
Yes, and just have that be,
We have a
That
CIC
CIC is on the first
date.
Monday.
well, we
March-
could be someplace else. We don't have to be in this room.
You could be, CIC starts at 7 if you wanted to be at 6.
We could just be in the, can't we just be in
We
the?
have to record it.
Oh. Well, can't we just do a tape recorder?
Yeah, we had been doing this format so that it was more inclusive for the public. We had heard concerns when it's in a back
about the
room and we're
20th?
doing interviews.
Oh, okay. All right.
What about the
Plus,
20th?
I have to be in both places at
Right,
one time.
I know you can't be, what about the 20th?
I just thought it was so imposing to have us up here interviewing the candidates, you know.
Yeah, we stopped the recording, so it's
Yeah.
what we've done for all of our committees. But we stopped the recording and do an audio recording during the actual interview
Mhm,
itself
right.
for that reason.
Yeah.
What about people's availability on the 20th?
I don't think I want to wait that long.
Well, I want to give them my undivided attention, and it's really hard when we've got an application, I agree with
March
Bob,
20th?
like this on here, where we've got to really listen hard, because there's a
Yeah,
lot of
come
stuff
back.
flying at us.
So we can do on March 13th and start at 6. The room is available.
Let's do that.
If you are available, I will check with the applicant.
March 13th at 6.
March 13th.
William.
Can you send that out via email? So
I will.
Of course, yeah.
Set your calendar in your phone.
Yeah, you took your pen.
I know.
I was thinking of myself. Because I never, you know.
All right.
The whole thing of pens.
So that means we need to definitely
Truth be told.
be here on time and get through it toot sweet.
Perfect. We have our questions and we are ready to
What
go.
are we doing at 6? Is that the interviews?
Yes.
Yeah.
I missed that part.
All right. You ready for communications?
I would love to hear some communications.
Oh, yes.
Right. So we
My
had
favorite.
last January or so, the Planning Commission looked at a request for a comprehensive plan amendment and zone change by historic properties near the intersection of 213 and Beaver Creek Road. Last time we were here, I gave you an update that the Land Use Board of Appeals had remanded that decision for some concerns about additional findings related to Goal 5 or natural resource concerns. That decision by LUBA has been appealed to the Court of Appeals. So we're at the Court of Appeals with that.
Interesting.
So it's been appealed by whom?
By
who?
one of the appellants.
Oh, by one of the appellants.
Yeah, not
okay.
all of them.
But
just-
one of them, okay.
Yes. And so we now then have a total of 2 cases at the Court of Appeals at the moment, the readoption of the Beaver Creek Road Concept Plan and this as well.
It's just because we're very popular.
Next is, you may have heard in the news this weekend or last week about some landslides. And
Yes,
some
I saw John on the
Trillium
news.
Park. Good.
He was standing there
He did well.
gestating.
He did well.
Yeah, he seemed a little nervous.
He gave a
He
nice
seemed a little nervous.
I assume he was gesticulating as
Was he
opposed to
just
gestating.
Well, he was doing that too.
So it's the city's concern.
We never know about him, but Bill.
So it's our desire to keep the city safe, and so we held a meeting for the residents in the neighborhood on Friday night, and had quite a good turnout to provide that open line of communication so that they knew what was going on and had our direct contact information, and we had theirs as well, so we could continue to have that dialogue as any landslides do or do not progress. The city did determine that a house near the intersection of Canyon and Trillium Park was dangerous, and so we posted that as such. We'll keep you updated as things happen.
I was going to buy a house in that area. I had a question because someone called me and asked me about, they said they'd driven by. We approved as a commission several months back the reinforcement of an area by the Oak Tree Terrace. Do you know what I'm referring to?
No, it was
They
the
were
Forest
putting
Ridge Apartments.
Forest Ridge in that
Right.
area,
The
and they were
retaining
asking
wall.
if we've had any reports about that during, because they said they could see them putting the pylons into the ground. They said, but is that going to be enough to hold it back, considering what we're experiencing now? We didn't expect this much rain again in another February. But
Yeah,
have
so-
you heard anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're continuing to watch about 5 landslides at the moment, but most of them don't have any threat to any people or buildings or anything at the moment. So that is one of the ones that we are continuing to watch. So it's between Berry Hill and Forest Edge. And as you recall, they came before the Planning Commission for a variety of approvals, including a variance to fence height for this really tall retaining wall. I have a retaining wall. I think it goes about 35 feet down into the earth with these I-beams, and then there's wood placed between the I-beams to hold back that soil. So it's for protection of the land above it, not really for the land below it. And so it's about $1 million retaining wall. They are allowed to work through the winter, although they're not working right now when it's raining in these soil conditions. So it is being monitored very, very regularly, and it's covered up with plastic at the moment. So they're very conscious not to open it up when we have that bad weather, to make sure that those conditions are appropriate for the work that's being done. So a lot of eyes on that one.
I was asked why they were doing it. I know they have plastic there, I guess. I just found that out from you. But they said, why didn't they start this in the summer when it was drier, rather than all the rain of doing that pounding in there? And I don't know.
Yeah, so it's part of our geologic hazards permit, has a time frame on it, but at some point when you get into the work and you're not totally done yet, things happen, it's safer to finish it than to not finish it. So they were allowed to work through the winter, but they're not working.
I met people ask why it didn't start in the summer to get it done, but
yeah, so it came before the Planning Commission in June-ish, I believe.
that's
off
what
the top of
it
my
You guys
head.
probably had to go out to
But,
bid. and
yeah, there's a lot
contract
of
work and yeah.
I thought they had all those guys in place.
Yeah.
So have we seen any movement in that area while they're doing this construction? I know the plastic is there. We've got plastic on Holcomb, as a matter of fact, Lower Holcomb. But have we seen any problems in that area at this point with all this rain we've had?
Information
From my understanding.
That's not one of the areas. Okay.
We're watching it to make sure that
You don't want to leave that here.
so above the wall or below the wall. I'm not.
I'm just asking if there's any movement at all, if the city's watching that while it's under construction.
We're definitely watching it while it's under construction. I know that the wall construction is going relatively well, given the context of what we're talking about. As far as Forest Edge itself, I can't talk about that. I wouldn't want to guess. But
Okay,
there's
just
a lot
wondered.
of eyes, a lot of inspectors, a lot of people out there watching.
I apologize for laughing. It's just when you said that it's being covered up with plastic, and I said to myself, well, what good is the plastic going to do when it could get washed away? It's kind of like a little...
It's very beneficial with all
Doesn't
the
make
rain
any
to keep
sense.
that saturation off. And then the last update that I have is that we have a new building inspector who just started today. His name is Sean Vander.
Sean.
Something.
It's Sean.
Something.
Sean.
Sean.
Sean V.
I feel like I should. Vander Jack. And
So you're going to get them all oriented and acclimated to the historic preservation of Oregon City, so that they don't do anything like some of our previous building officials have done because they didn't get it.
Absolutely. So under the watch of our building official, Mike Roberts, whom we are very pleased with.
He's so awesome.
Great. We will be doing a lot of training to get a building inspector, and then the idea is in the building division that we have a little bit of cross-training going on, so we can all talk to each other and understand what we're doing and cover for each other when we're out. So that he'll be learning commercial plans review and residential plan review and inspection. So we're very excited to welcome him to the family.
Right on. Huzzah. Yeah.
Do you have any communications from you fabulous, awesome gentlemen, now that you've been anointed as awesome?
That's what we were called when, yeah.
That's what we get paid the big bucks for. You forgot to say that.
Up here, so I'm not on sector back there.
Yes. Bob, any
It's your fault.
news? You want to report on anything you've been doing, or TAC?
I just want a
or-
redefinition of quasi-judicial.
You want a redefinition of it?
I want it kicked up the ladder a
Okay,
few.
well, why don't you write that and you could submit
No,
that
I'm
to
looking
Lori?
at that gentleman right over
No,
there.
no.
We'll have you do the research and come back with a
you're-
three-page paper.
You're much more accessible than Bill
Oh,
is.
yeah.
Bill's got bigger fish to fry than
And
that.
at 10:30, we all done?
Yeah.
And we're
Zach,
all
Probably
done.
missed the
anything?
Bachelor.
If you say that one more time, I'm going to rule you out of order.
Okay, well, wait till the Dancing with the Stars starts.
Any news?
And we're done. No, I have gotten any.
No.
Sat back there.
Our meeting's on Thursday, so next meeting I'll have something.
Yes, so yes, he's got a meeting on Thursday with the mobility folks.
The 213 intersection.
Yes, the exciting intersection. Okay,
Oh, that's right.
we are officially adjourned. You may turn off your mics.
Well, that was the funnest meeting I've ever sat through.